the climate crisis. Every one of us has a role to play. As a reflection of our strategy to build trust with stakeholders and deliver sustained outcomes, we're committed to leading by example. In 2020, we made a commitment to reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. There are 5 things I'm particularly proud of. First, our climate targets were independently validated as being in line with a 1.5 degree scenario. Importantly, our climate targets cover emissions across our whole value chain, including both direct and indirect emissions across Scope 1, 2, as well as 3. Second, recognizing that our commitment is going to take an effort across our whole business, we now have a net zero leader in each country in which we operate around the world to drive local execution. And we've committed to have the carbon emissions associated with delivering our services by 2030. Third, we are contributing to the transition to net zero around the world. For example, we're a proud member of the UN's Race to Zero and the business ambition for 1.5 degrees. Specifically, we've joined the largest public-private coalition to expand the market for high-integrity carbon credits, as well as protect tropical forests. And we've also committed to accelerate the supply and use of sustainable aviation fuel. Fourth, we continue to support the development of globally aligned ESG reporting standards by collaborating with standard setters and organizations like the World Economic Forum. We've become a founding member of the Net Zero Financial Service Providers Alliance, which means that we'll report on how our audit services are consistent with broader net zero goals. And finally, fifth, we're upskilling all of our people on the importance and relevance of climate, ESG, and all of the related issues. And we're supporting our clients as they develop and implement concrete net zero plans and embed ESG across the entirety of their organizations. And as a community of solvers, we are uniquely positioned to bring the right combination of people, capabilities, and technology together to support the worldwide focus on the net zero transition.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Kevin Cambridge. I'm the Advisory and ESG Partner for PwC Bahamas. Welcome to ESG Week 2022 under the theme ESG and Net Zero, Securing a Sustainable Future for the Caribbean. This event is part of PwC's commitment to take bold steps on ESG to create sustainable value, help guide our clients through ESG risks and opportunities, and nurture an environment for critical transformation. We have a power-packed cadre of presenters today and a very deep bench of individuals who are really reared up and eager to, in essence, just share all that is ESG. We'll be presenting on topics ranging from ESG and from a climate perspective, corporate governance elements, ESG government, and we'll be wrapping up with ESG reporting and disclosure perspectives. The genesis of this presentation by PwC came about early on when we launched our Caribbean Corporate Governance Survey 2022. That survey was a differentiator in many respects in that we were not only able to gain insights on a regional basis, we were able to, however, also garner very segmented information on all the various jurisdictions within the Caribbean. We then took that information through data analytics and really found out exactly where we were as a region in terms of the ESG journeys. We've also taken upon ourselves to have conversations with a number of our clients, as well as discussions internally with our PwC offices within the jurisdiction. This inaugural event is really a culmination of all of that activity, and we are very, very excited to be at this place at this current time. My production team, I thank them all. My presenters, which will be joining us throughout the series of presentations today, I thank you for joining. As the ESG coordinator, I've had the opportunity really to sit across the room virtually, of course, with all of our presenters. And I can really say that there's one common element with all of them. They really bring the passion for what they do, and they're subject matter experts in their own rights for that respect. As a matter of housekeeping, there are a number of you that have joined us via Global Meet. That would afford you the opportunity to raise questions throughout the course of the presentations. However, I must warn you that due to the power-packed nature of this presentation, we may not be able to get to all of those questions, but we will get back to you with answers. I would like to thank all of the presenters once again, and you, our public and our audience in terms of our business community and PwC in itself. We've used this as an opportunity for upskilling, even with PwC across the region. So that said, I'd like to now introduce our first presenter, who's actually our feature presenter for today. Raquel Moses is with the UNFCCC Global Ambassador and Chief Executive Officer of the Caribbean Climate Smart Accelerator. Raquel has enabled leadership and organizations around the world to go beyond their current vision and stay on the cusp of what's next. As the newest UN Global Advisor in the race to net zero, Raquel has become a critical advisor for driving the shift to digital, process automation, and implementing key turnaround projects that heighten customer engagement and strengthen organization performance. Raquel, welcome.
Thank you so much. It is so great to be with you this morning. I am really excited, and I'm so delighted that we are coming back into like physical interaction, although this is still virtual. So I'm going to treat you, audience, as though this is physical. I may ask you questions, I may engage you, but we're going to have a conversation this morning. So we're going to talk about ESG, and I'm going to tell you that it might surprise you, and certainly might alarm PwC, but ESG is going away, right? It's you heard it here first. When we're talking about environmental, social, and governance perspectives on business, we're acting as though it is optional, or you can have a business and not explore ESG. ESG is weaved into the fiber of how we operate and what we do and how we think about business, especially in terms of longevity. So if we're not thinking about our business in terms of ESG, which is what we're calling it now, but this is really just how you operate your business, how you think about it, how you report on it, how you play the long game. Unless, of course, you're setting up like a lemonade stand. And even then, I think, you need to think about the ESG impact of it. But I'm not going to get into detail on an explanation of what ESG is. We have the experts who will come after me to explain that. But I do want to break down for you. On the environmental front, for example, if you are not thinking about the emissions that your business creates, the impact on air and water, the ability to impact ground pollution, the circularity of your operations, then what does that mean in terms of your ability to continue that business? What does that mean in terms of how your customers think about you? What does that mean in terms of your ability to continue this business, or your ability to meet the regulation when it comes? So there are these things that you need to keep an eye on and realize that you don't want to be caught on the back foot. That's not the place that we want to be. And we certainly want to talk through what are the opportunities and what are the challenges and opportunities that this presents. Because a lot of times we talk about climate especially like it is a cost center. $80 trillion, at least, if you believe Morgan Stanley, will be spent on climate action to meet the goals that we've set. And that figure keeps increasing. And so if you are not, it's not like we're going to take the $80 trillion and throw it into the atmosphere and hope that that solves the problem. $80 trillion will be spent on solutions, it will be spent on advisors, it will be spent on a number of things to transition. It will be spent on new technologies, it will be invested. And do you want to partake in that opportunity? Do you want to partake in that economy? Or do you instead want to be the only one spending money and not necessarily seeing the gains? The winners in this race will be the ones who get out front, who seize the opportunities that this presents. On the social front, coming out of the pandemic, we know that if you're not thinking about employees, if you're not thinking about labor practices, safety, quality, supply chain labor, and all of these things, you're not going to win. You're not going to thrive. You barely will survive because there is so much happening, and people now realize, I think once your way of life is under siege, you tend to make more mindful choices. And that is where people are now. They're certainly thinking about how do we make more mindful choices to determine what happens next in our lives. So you have to think about the social aspect of your business as well. And then on the governance front, if you're not thinking about my soapbox issue, board diversity and executive compensation and corruption and those kinds of things, you are leaving yourself exposed for somebody else to do it better. And we know the data suggests that the more diverse your board, the more diverse your leadership team, the better your results, the better your satisfaction, the more engaged your employees are, because everyone feels heard and included. And certainly people feel more that the organization can have their perspective. Certainly customers can see that the organization can have their perspective because everyone's included, everyone's voice is heard. And it makes for a more tumultuous, I suppose, business operation, but one that leads to better results. So last year, 2 years ago, about $632 billion was spent on climate action. And that figure is increasing every year, and it needs to be 4 times that. So if you are thinking about where are the opportunities for me and what are the things that are happening that can impact what I'm doing, then you're already on the back foot, and that's not where we need to be. So I'm going to give you a couple of quotes, right? The first one is, the idea that this is a new business paradigm is silly. And I'm going to ask you to guess where that's from. I'll give you 2 seconds. That's actually from Barron's Weekly, and that was about Amazon. People were thinking that Amazon was going to fail. So if you're thinking about ESG, well, this is something newfangled and it's not here to stay, and it's not how we need to operate. It doesn't need to be inculcated into the fiber of how we operate. Then I think you're wrong. And the other one is, I predict that this would have failed by now. And this was the CEO of International Airlines Group talking about Virgin Airlines, because they were saying that, and this was back in 2012. So a lot of times the things that we think for the future are in fact wrong. So I'm going to share with you what we're seeing in terms of ESG through a portfolio of the things that we're working on, as well as some other things that are that we've seen across the region. And I will try as much as possible to give you a regional perspective. So one of the most exciting projects that we're working on is turning plastic waste into a resin that can then strengthen concrete. And that presents a unique opportunity to create circularity in the way that we build, the way that we execute, and to use up the plastic waste. We also have this unique opportunity with Cycling Partners of Jamaica, and they're doing an amazing job of collecting plastic waste and using that to then recycle that plastic as well. So if your business isn't thinking about how you're using the resources that you have and how you're incorporating circularity into your business, then there are opportunities that are potentially passing you by. So we're working with the regional cement companies who are looking at how do we use this resin and how do we use this resin to then increase insulation in our built environment, improve the nature of our built environment, because again, the storms keep coming. And when the storms come, we need to fortify our infrastructure. So what better way than to use the waste that we have to fortify that built environment? We're also seeing things like, and we've supported entrepreneurs in Jamaica on coral rehabilitation, and they're using that as a tourism opportunity. So they are incorporating tourists who want to come and they want to dive, but they also want to participate in fixing the coral reef, and that helps one because you're rehabilitating the coral reef, and so you're protecting the assets on land, but you're also providing people with an experience and something that they can feel good about. We're also seeing mangrove rehabilitation and mangrove replanting as a unique opportunity, tourism opportunity, and lots of people are getting involved. So they want to go on vacation, but they don't want to feel bad about the carbon emissions. So they want to do some mangrove rehabilitation while they're on vacation. And this thing is starting to grow. So again, if your business isn't on the forefront of thinking about how are these kinds of issues affecting me and what are the opportunities that this presents, I think whether you believe in it or not, what we believe is what ultimately manifests. And so, we keep calling on this recession, which I'm totally not for. I don't know who's looking forward to this recession that everybody seems to be calling for, but I think we need to think about how we think and how we say things and what we focus on. And if you focus on the opportunities that ESG presents, you will find them. But you have to do the work. You cannot just sit and hope and wait and think that, okay, great, I will follow the rest of the industry. Because once you go where everyone else already is, you've missed the opportunity. So we're seeing things like climate smart agriculture across a number of different countries. Barbados, Jamaica, Bahamas. We're seeing it in Bermuda, lots of the B countries, incidentally. And they are the ones who are looking at how can we grow food? How can we increase our food security and make that more protective of the vulnerabilities that we face? So, there are all kinds of equipment that can increase yield, etc. And all of these things are things that we need to be either investing in or evaluating for our own businesses to think about what are the opportunities that this presents. We're also seeing a lot of investment in the blue economy. If I had $1 for every time a blue economy investor came to us saying that we're looking for projects in the blue economy, we would literally have raised enough money for the Caribbean to thrive in its climate action and in its climate transition, because people are interested. We talk about the fact that we are on Earth, and I heard this wonderful saying yesterday about we call it Earth, but it's more covered with water than Earth. So we need to really call this, this is a blue planet. This is more blue than green. So we need to explore what are the opportunities that our businesses can look into in the blue economy. And we need to educate ourselves and understand what is going on in that space. For example, we're working with a company that reduces emissions in the airline industry. And what's amazing about that is the savings that can generate. So you can feel good about what you're doing. You can engage your customers on being different. You can talk about the work that you're doing. And this isn't greenwashing, but this is actually spending the time, making a difference while you invest. I mean, Virgin Airlines has saved millions of dollars in fuel because they have incorporated, and this isn't like technology where it's like, okay, you plug this in and you improve the performance of your fuel efficiency. This is pilot behavior, something as simple as that. But you also give them an opportunity to feel good about what they're doing and how their actions are reducing the carbon emissions in how they perform. We're seeing things like transforming sargassum into biofuels. Johann Dujon, his business has exploded, and he's now at capacity. Yes, considering additional investment, but really growing the business exponentially based on transforming sargassum into different types of fuels and fertilizer. And so there are business opportunities that exist, whether within your own business or on the sidelines of your business. I think one of the most exciting opportunities that we are currently involved in is the green hydrogen transition for the region. And if you're familiar with green hydrogen, and if you're not, I hope that you get involved or you learn about it. For me, and I'll give you my personal perspective. Green hydrogen is last mile. It is the thing that is going to allow us to decarbonize everything. We're not going to get big batteries on airplanes and big batteries on ships. It's just, to be able to use things like solar, etc. So we're going to have to use a clean fuel that's green that allows us to make that transition. And right now, we use hydrogen to a limited degree, but the expectation is, and it's made from hydrocarbons now, the expectation is that use of hydrogen will explode, which is why you're seeing so many billions of dollars being invested in green hydrogen right now, especially throughout Latin America and Europe. There is no end of investment taking place. And we need to look at these things. What are the trends that are starting to spark that we then need to understand? How does that apply to us? So in our green hydrogen work, what we're looking at is Dominica produces geothermal, and they have magnificent. They have over 6 geothermal zones available to them for the generation of their energy, completely clean, carbon free, and they will out of the gate produce more hydrogen than they can. Produce more geothermal energy than they can use. So what do they do with the excess? Because it's expensive to explore geothermal. Well, on the other side of it, there's Trinidad that has a history in oil and gas, and certainly would want to explore things like moving from ammonia to green ammonia, looking at green hydrogen as the next fuel. We aren't Trinidad and Tobago, where I am now and where I'm from. We aren't an oil and gas nation. We're an energy nation, and we need to understand how things are transitioning and what is our ability to transition as the landscape transitions. So if we look at in order to produce green hydrogen, what you need are copious amounts of renewable energy, which at this time we do not have. And when you look at our growth in renewables in Trinidad and Tobago, it has not been that amazing. So how do we get access to industrial scale renewable energy in order to fuel this green hydrogen ambition that we have? Well, we are looking at putting in an undersea cable between Dominica, working with Kenneth Day Green and the government of Dominica and NGC, looking at how would and IDB is also investing in the feasibility at the moment. How do we look at putting in an undersea cable between Dominica and Trinidad and Tobago and using that to send the geothermal energy to Trinidad for the production of green hydrogen? And that's amazing, but we're working with a number of other people who are looking at offshore wind, who are putting in battery infrastructure to be able to address their issues of variability and things like solar. So how do we look at what are the opportunities in this space? And we took a bit of a step back and we said, wait a minute, there's Grenada, there's Barbados, there's St. Vincent, there's, Dominica. All of these countries have needs to either buy or sell renewables. And so by creating a single energy marketplace, especially in the southern and eastern Caribbean, presents a unique opportunity for us to compete at scale and export green hydrogen as a region, providing an entirely new industry. But we have to be audacious as a region. We have to think about what are some of the big bets that we can do. And while it may sound like it's extraordinary and pie in the sky, the reality is that link between Dominica and Trinidad and Tobago is half the length of the North Sea link that's currently between Norway and the UK. So we're not talking about something that is, oh my gosh, we have to figure out how to do it. This is something that we just need to work out the mechanics of how to get it done in order to put it in place. And these are the kinds of things that we're seeing. These are the kinds of audacious goals that we're looking at. I went to the Global Maritime Forum at the sidelines of the UN General Assembly meeting recently, and they were absolutely consumed with how do we decarbonize the maritime industry. Because what we don't want is the regulation to find us before we find the solutions. And that is what we're facing. If we are not paying attention to where we need to go, then we will be compelled or forced or regulated into a space before we're ready. So the opportunity is to get ready. And I'll give you another example. Belize just closed on what is the largest blue bond in history, $364 million in a blue bond, which functions like a debt for nature swap. These are opportunities if we are looking at things through the right lens. And I will leave you with this thought. In 1894, do you know what the biggest global crisis was? I really wish you could come on and jump in and tell me. But in 1894, the biggest global crisis was horse manure, because people had all these horses, everything was horse driven, and they had horse carcasses all over the place, and they could not figure out how to solve this problem of horse manure. Fast forward, cars. So the thing that solved the problem we had over 100 years ago is now part of the problem that we have now. We have the ability to transform, but the ones who make the money, the ones who succeed, the ones who get the windfall of that transformation are the ones who are willing to take that chance, are willing to go first, who see where things are going, and they are willing to forge ahead. And we have to be willing to do that. So I'm really excited about the opportunities that this presents. I really hope that this is the start of your journey, or you're along your journey and you're on your trajectory. And I'm hoping that I'm not just preaching to the choir, but I thank you so much for your time, and I wish you the very best. I hope to see many of you leading on the charge and taking on the opportunities that will inevitably come out of this transition. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raquel. And really, I smiled because you just made my job a whole lot easier. I think you literally just set the pace in terms of what's to follow, in terms of us looking at everything from getting out in front of ESG to giving yourselves more options the earlier you get started, as well as spending time making the investment now. So all of our attendees that are really participating in what we're doing right now are actually making that investment. You took us everywhere from blue bonds to horse manure, and that's quite unique, and you did it quite eloquently. So that said, I'd like to now introduce our next presenter, Ronelle Dothorn-Bort. She'll be presenting on the topic, Picking Up the Pace, Rethinking Governance. Ronelle is a partner of the PwC Eastern Caribbean firm based in Barbados. She is a tax and legal services leader for the Caribbean region and the environmental, social, and governance leader for the Eastern Caribbean firm. She is an attorney at law and a fellow in the Governance Institute of Canada, and holds an LLM Masters in Corporate and Commercial Law with an emphasis on corporate governance. What I didn't have in the notes, but it's something that stands out to me, and it's quite commendable, is that Ronelle has been leading the charge. Earlier, I mentioned the Caribbean Corporate Governance Survey 2022. Ronelle, over the years, has spearheaded all of these surveys, and this year, I must say, it was pretty much a slam dunk in terms of us being able to get ahead of some of the topics that we're about to discuss today, and really do some market sounding and really understand and listen to the voice of the customer. So for that, I do thank you, Ronelle, and I now give you the baton. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin, and good morning, everyone. Thank you also to Raquel for really setting the tone for us this morning to have this really important discussion. Very pleased to be with all of you and to share a few thoughts on ESG from a Caribbean perspective. So we know all too well what our region has been through over the last few years. Our Caribbean private sector really has weathered a very difficult period, and we're going to continue to be put to the test as we try to rebuild and grow our economies. Our boards really have an important role to play in doing the types of things that Raquel just spoke about. Taking the initiative, being bold, being brave, and driving those opportunities, stepping back, assessing, and moving forward with clarity and with boldness so that we can tackle these problems head on. Our boards can reinforce our demand for accountability and trust and independence of thought so that our economies can grow being proactive and face emerging risks head on. And that obviously very much includes sustainability. So how do we get our boards to think more consistently this way? That was the goal of the survey that Kevin just spoke about, understanding where we are and then driving the discussions to keep things moving in the right direction. Our boards really have to start with the right people serving as stewards of their organizations and also of our state-owned enterprises, fundamental to how our economies as a whole move forward. So understanding those goals and then understanding how our current business leaders view their own performances and what areas we need to improve on, we think is a good place to start, and that's why we invested the time and the energy and the passion in our survey. Can I get the next slide, please? So I'd like to start with a quick look at the evolution of ESG in the Caribbean context. So we then need to understand as well where our boards are currently in order to take the right steps moving forward. So I'll share some of the highlights of that survey that we just mentioned. Next slide. What does sustainability mean to our region? Next, please. The Caribbean, as Raquel just touched on, and we're all aware of this, really is one of the world's most diverse biodiversity hotspots. We have some, we're home to a large number of endemic species, and those contribute to healthy ecosystems and drive our tourism products across the region. But largely because of climate change, our region really has suffered the highest rate of species extinctions. And by 2050, the expectation is that sea levels in the region will rise to as high as 40 centimeters and could exceed 1 meter by 2100. So the scientists are making all of this clear to us, because ultimately what that's going to result in is coastal erosion for us, reduction of land space, our people will be forced to relocate, and this will ultimately also threaten our agricultural and our water resources. The UN estimates that capital GDP loss to the CARICOM region due to sea level rise will be as high as $187 billion, or 19.2% of our GDP by 2080. And all of these things combine to really ultimately threaten our very survival within the region. The flip side of that, though, is that in reality, SIDS, like our Caribbean countries, contribute less than 1% to total greenhouse gas emissions. So on this basis, some of our people, the average Caribbean person, is asking, well, why should the battle to save the planet be ours to fight when we're doing the least damage but feeling the most pain? And we all know the answer, because the battle is still ours. It is still our collective responsibility to do our part to save this planet. And each and every one of us have a part to play. So although we are disproportionately affected by destructive and, for us, economically devastating climate impacts, we have to shout the loudest, but in doing so, we also have to demonstrate that we are willing to do our part to fix the problem. So next month, our Caribbean small island leaders will travel to COP27 to lobby for economic rights before diplomats from across the globe. They're going to request loss and damage, or L&D funding, to help pay for what has become an out-of-control climate-related debt crisis. So they have to take these steps. But in doing so, I think we'll agree that it's fundamental that they're able to do so, demonstrating that their own people, especially the businesses holding economic power in our communities, are doing their part to fight this global battle. And I believe very strongly that governance, good governance, is at the heart of meeting that responsibility. Can I get the next slide, please? So the issues of an entity's impact on the environment and society, and how good governance should help to make that impact positive. As Raquel said, this is not new. This has always been a discussion that has been on around the board table of some boards, but it's obviously increasing in importance and has come to the fore, because what is new is this renewed sort of re-energized and scaled up demand for these all to be areas that are woven into the fabric of a company's strategy and how it is valued. These are no longer nice to haves. The demand is that companies figure out how to create financial value while solving the big problems. We have big problems, both environmentally and socially. So how do companies do well while doing good? And all of that needs to be within a framework that allows for transparency, accountability, and ethical behavior. So the question is now being asked how to create governance models that allow for what we can call stakeholder capitalism. To thrive, we have to protect the balance, because if it's not viable in the long term, our business leaders won't participate. We accept that in the short to medium, there may be sacrifices depending on industries that will have to be made, but they at least need to see that in the long term, there's viability and there's profit. If it's not equitable, our societies are going to protest. And if we don't protect the environment, it won't matter, because none of us will be around to enjoy it, or we won't have a place to enjoy it. So the board of every enterprise has to ask those tough questions about how it's going to achieve that balance. And that's regardless of the region, the size, the industry. Every positive step, no matter how small, is worthwhile. Can I get the next slide, please? ESG is driven largely by the climate agenda, and it's going to continue to dominate the global political agenda and the corporate agenda for a long time to come. I think the insurance sectors and the financial sectors are going to act as catalysts for the change that we need to see happen. I think there's a lot of evidence out there to show that ESG products are already outperforming their counterparts. And we have studies done by PwC, Bloomberg, and others that make this clear. So just taking a quick look at the list of how far we've come since 2006, we've had a steady increase in the number of national and international ESG initiatives and regulations. So the 2030 and 2050 agendas and important disclosure requirements in the EU, US, UK. And as of June this year, we also have work being done to create our own taxonomy for ESG disclosure in Latin America and the Caribbean. That is likely to gain momentum in coming months to determine what is green and what is not green at a national level. And I sort of paint the picture of how things have developed with this long list that continues to grow, because even though our Caribbean companies may not be concerned about making ESG an intrinsic part of their strategies on the basis that, the feeling is that these regulations don't apply to us. We're not hearing about a Caribbean Latin American initiative for taxonomy and looking at IFRS and SASB and thinking, well, it's going to take a while for that to come together. It feels as if those things may be a ways off, but the reality is that as long as a Caribbean company is part of a value chain that touches on the UK, the US, or the EU, the impact of those countries' requirements are going to be felt sooner rather than later. Our boards have to start to take the right steps now, and they have to get comfortable with disclosing the strategic decisions and actions that they're going to make in terms of ESG, because if they're part of a value chain that's international, it's going to be demanded of them very shortly. So they're initially going to be voluntary, but ultimately they're going to become mandatory. And if our companies can't rise to the occasion, what may happen is that they'll be removed or replaced within the value chains that they're currently enjoying, which we can ill afford. Next. Just a reminder that as much as our focus and our discussion today is on the E, on the dire environmental situation that we have to address, boards also have to remember that ESG also requires us looking after each other and our communities and using good governance to drive the E and the S. So yes, climate change, but also community and the wider stakeholder support that's needed for us to be healthy in our societies. And the composition and skills of our boards. Those things are extremely fundamental to ESG. Next. So what that means is that our boards need to arm themselves with the ability to lead from the top on the E and the S. Starting fundamentally with accountability. Our boards have to take ownership at that level. The board of every entity has a fiduciary responsibility to protect the company against all risks, and that includes sustainability and the failure to do right by society. Because make no mistake, not addressing societal issues, that is a major risk to an organization. Boards need to have a good command of the subjects of the environment and society and the impact of their companies on both of these. Everybody doesn't need to be a diversity and inclusion or a sustainability expert, but the board as a whole needs to be capable of continuing to learn. Boards need to be agile and be able to pivot as necessary. And that calls for willingness to honestly assess performance on an ongoing basis, and then take the necessary steps to address deficiencies in the best interest of the enterprise. So that might mean training or calling in experts to guide the board, or may also mean deselection or recruitment. And those are things that we discussed or got feedback on as part of our survey. Board structure, having the right people sitting around the table that is appropriately diverse, because we've evolved into a much more complex environment where boards need to be able to support the executive in ways well beyond financial statements and management of what are traditional risks. The board needs to be able to support and govern on social conduct, environmental challenges, and overall sustainability. Boards need to consider independence, tenure, turnover, all of those things that will lead to the development of a strong board that's able to move an enterprise forward. Materiality assessment. Boards need to be able to understand and assess the extent of both the risk and the opportunities. Raquel really went into those opportunities with a lot of passion that I share, that the opportunities are there. As much as we identify the risks and we know we need to address them, the opportunities are also there. And it is those who are bold enough to move first and move quickly who will lead the way and largely take the lion's share of the benefits to be derived. So boards need to decide how to invest in and develop the right technologies and systems and people. Their talent pools are fundamental to how an entity will be successful in this space. Because all of these things then allow them to be successful in supporting executive teams, in making their entities part of the solution when it comes to our environment and our societies, rather than part of the problem. And once you've figured out you're working with the right structure, the board then assesses the materiality of each of the factors. How do you then strategically integrate all of that into how the entity moves forward? So integrating that into strategy is fundamental. And once you've made the decision and determination as to how that's to be done, how do you then incentivize executives to make sure that that strategy is put into action? That may involve developing executive KPIs that are linked to the achievement of short, medium, and long-term goals, both on social and environmental. Reporting and disclosure we talked about, and the fact that that's coming whether we like it or not at some level and in some shape or form, and maybe quicker for others, depending on some rather than others, depending on how closely connected they are to the EU and the US and the UK. And then sessions like this allow us to exchange information and to grow and develop and move forward as a region to tackle this head on. So it is very important as well that we continue to exchange information, both on our boards, within our business communities, and across the region. Next slide, please. So with those tools in mind, we wanted to understand where our boards are within the region vis-a-vis ESG and their ability to tackle it head on, keeping those issues in mind, those tools in mind. What do we need to do to push the Caribbean ESG agenda forward? So we asked nearly 200 directors in 6 territories key questions on where their boards are in their ESG evolution. And we're proud of the results because we think it gives us important insight into where we need to focus our immediate attention. So I'm going to try to summarize a few of these results, and our full results and full report are readily available, so I hope you'll take a look in due course. But first, to touch on board composition, our first few questions focused on composition. We asked directors, when your board recruits its next director, what is the single most important attribute you will prioritize in the search? We also asked to what extent they agree with certain key statements about board diversity. So industry expertise at 33% continues to be the main area of focus for board recruitment in the short term, followed by risk management and operational expertise. Of concern to us, though, is that diversity in attributes such as age, you can see at 4%, environmental sustainability experience at 3%, cyber risk and race seems still considered to be of negligible value based on the feedback. It's sort of difficult to reconcile that with the fact that 98% of our directors, though, view diversity as bringing unique perspectives, and almost all directors also agreed that diversity stands to enhance board and strategic performance. So we have some work to do in giving consideration to the composition of our boards, but this is going to be driven by a shift in our long-term strategic thinking. Next. It appears that directors view diversity as having the potential to enhance board performance, but generally our boards don't have immediate plans to fundamentally address these gaps, because 40% have indicated that no such efforts have been made over the last 2 years, and very little focus for our next recruitment cycles will be placed on this area. So the leading reasons cited for lack of traction were an over-reliance on existing close-knit networks to source candidates, and the reluctance of long-serving directors to retire. Many long-serving directors have a wealth of knowledge to contribute, and they can very much continue to add value to their organizations. But that has to be balanced, in our view, with diverse perspectives and skills and experience, so that our companies can be true to their stakeholders and pivot as necessary for long-term sustainability and value creation. It seems our current approach continues maybe to underestimate the importance of an entity's ability to understand and respond to diverse realities, as well as the impact of younger generations, because their view of an enterprise in terms of the E and the S will impact whether they're willing to be available, whether they're willing to form part of a talent pool and a consumer base, because that group increasingly demonstrates its unwillingness to tolerate poor behavior that impacts on the E and the S. These perspectives are needed in the boardroom. Next slide, please. We also had a look at board practices. One invaluable tool in ensuring the effectiveness of a board is self-reflection, analysis, and deliberate steps to correct any shortcomings. And that's where board assessments come in. Only 50% of directors confirmed that their boards undertook assessments within the last year, so there's room for improvement, for sure. Assessments allow boards to remain learning boards, giving them that opportunity to identify where they can grow and improve, but only if the process is really embraced. A successful board assessment requires that leadership, from the time an assessment is taken on, leadership has to make it clear that this is to be honest and constructive, and they have to create a safe environment, the chair, the company secretary, and whoever else is leading the process, within a confidential and a safe space so that there can be open dialogue. There are clear challenges there, because in response to another question, not reflected on this slide, but another question gave us results to the effect that 74% of respondents have concerns about the ability to be open and frank in their current assessment processes. 33% of respondents confirmed that no actions were taken to change anything, and that's kind of hard to understand, because a board that undertakes a process that can determine no room at all for improvement, I think, has missed an invaluable opportunity to learn and improve. Almost 70% of the assessments that were actually undertaken were self-assessments. And that, can create some challenges because we're all human. It's very difficult to get the level of reflection and honest assessment needed from self-administered tests. And what you don't want is that it becomes a tick-the-box exercise. Deselection and important changes to board composition, those things can really only happen after frank assessments. And that then allows, for issues from anything from attendance and preparation for meetings, poor interactions, poor behavior, and failure to contribute or to even understand important aspects of the business. For those things to be addressed, it is important that boards honestly undertake assessment processes. Next slide, please. So many directors also acknowledge time is an issue. They feel stretched for time and they're finding it hard to deliver an appropriate level of oversight. So 2/3 of directors confirm that they spent less than 150 hours a year in their board oversight role, and 1/3 less than 100. That is likely not enough given the preparation and level of engagement needed to play a meaningful role. It may also be indicative of a larger, more fundamental issue because 35% or more directors also expressed concerns about several important areas receiving insufficient board oversight, including succession planning, cyber ESG, and strategy and risk. And in addition, 63% believe that their boards understand their company's strategy very well, with this falling to 59% and 33% when it came to a company's competitive landscape. So we have to be concerned about the amount of time being invested in doing what is an extremely important job once one agrees to sit on a board. Next, please. We also focused on the important area of strategic focus. Stakeholders, younger stakeholders are increasingly aware of organizations having short-term purposes and visions, and those not seen to be doing right by the environment and the society, they have little or no patience with them. Boards need to consider how they're going to deploy their limited resources in order to strategize and pivot. And the G really is how you pull all of that together. So it's promising that the majority of our respondents confirm that they either very much or somewhat agree that key societal and environmental issues need to be taken into account in formulating strategy. 82 to 89% of respondents were positive on areas like resource scarcity, climate, human rights, etc. Of great concern, though, is the admission that only 11% of our directors think that their boards really understand the risks associated with environmental and social issues. So boards need to question whether their composition allows them to collectively be equipped to address these issues. Next, please. We also asked about the board's oversight of the executive team. A key tool that I touched on that earlier, a key tool is in being successful in this process is being able to incentivize the executive team. But our directors seem to have some concerns about whether the tool is actually one that they can use, because 55% have concerns that executives are already overpaid, 40% are concerned that compensation committees are too willing to approve generous packages, and more than 30% feel that targets are sometimes too easy to achieve. So we may have to put some work in there with making sure that we're imaginative, we're creative, and that we're able to use that tool effectively to drive our ESG initiatives. Next. The final snippet I'd like to share is regarding the broader environment. 58% of our directors very much agree that companies should have a social purpose. 37% only somewhat agreed this to be the case. So boards need to question whether, they have bought into their companies being ethically bound to take the interests of a wider stakeholder group into account. And that includes the environment and society, because they too provide different forms of capital to an enterprise. Only 40% very much agree that companies should be able to be profitable while doing good in society, and also that the metrics on their purpose should be disclosed. Unfortunately, less than 40% feel strongly that creating a diverse workforce should be an area of focus. So I think our private sector boardrooms have acknowledged the need for wider goals, but we haven't really truly made this central to our strategies. So we have work to do. But the results, I think, also show that there's a reasonable level of awareness and a desire to do the right things. The feedback suggests that our directors are aware of the need to have these discussions and to focus on more than purely economic results. So let's continue to drive the discussions and support each other. And I'm confident that we're going to continue to make significant progress in the short to medium term in the ESG space within our region. It's so important for our community, and I'm glad to see that we're all becoming more and more invested. So with that, I will hand back over to you, Kevin. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ronelle. And I must say that your contribution definitely begins to answer the question, why now, which will be a theme that we carry throughout the presentation today. You also mentioned the word pivot. So we'll be pivoting now actually to looking at government and the topic of sustainable nations building the economy of tomorrow. Up next, we have Agnieszka Gawecki, who is actually our PwC lead for government and public service networks for more than 12,000 professionals, helping governments around the globe maximize positive impact on their citizens. She also leads the ESG agenda across 29 countries in Central and Eastern Europe and advises clients in both the public and private sectors on their green transformation. I've had the opportunity to meet Agnieszka probably about 2 years ago at a new energy conference, and she definitely brings the energy and the passion. That said, we welcome you, Agnieszka.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Can you hear me? Okay, that's good to know. Welcome, everyone, and I'm really, really delighted. It is the second time, actually, I'm part of this event, and I'm really delighted to be able to share our PwC views and also my personal views about what next and what we should focus on going forward. Indeed, the title of today's presentation is Building the Economies of Tomorrow, and in particular as it comes to sustainable nations. So we can go to the next slide, and I thought it would be a great start, and I put Prime Minister of Barbados and her very wise words saying actually that to propel on everything that needs to be done, we need to have trust, and this trust cannot be won by bridging promises, and this is indeed the case. I remember us talking a year ago, exactly after COP26, and I remember that we said, the conclusions were somehow positive, and we were all hopeful, waiting for COP27. And maybe it is fair to start by saying that actually objectively, the situation has become even more challenging than it has been last year. When you look at the concerns about energy security worldwide, especially in part of the world I am in Europe, it's quite a big challenge. The same as it comes to very severe increase in energy prices, which brings huge concerns around politicians and societies about affordability of energy as such. And clearly, one's having conversations with various public sector representatives, but also businesses. Today, I am in Paris, in France, on my way back home, but had a couple of conversations with our clients, and pretty much their concerns are exactly the same. So what with the security of energy, what if its price, and also how is it going to impact sustainability concerns. Let us go to the next slide, and I pick up here 4 areas that I believe are specifically interesting and that I would monitor from the Caribbean region perspective. First of all, as I said, COP27, again, the one that we hope will be a practical one, that the success will be measured on its ability to pretty much address two goals. The first one is solidarity, and the second one is accountability. And I think both of them are certainly absolutely critical as it comes to Caribbean region. We want to hear that the conversations and also some very clear commitments will be focused on how to scale up support for adaptation, how to address loss and damage, and also how to make sure that we honor the obligations around climate finance as well as just transition. The second thing and the second trend that is clearly very important as well is higher decarbonization rates requirements and energy crisis. I will focus on this in a moment. The third one is about technologies and how important it is to make sure that we are putting technology as one of the areas where we are talking about net zero. And then again, the rise of net zero commitments. So we can go to the next slide to maybe focus a little bit about, how it all changed since COP26. And I think this slide looks quite busy, but it is quite a serious slide, and I would spend a little bit of time here. First of all, when you look at the slide, the chart that we have here, you will see number 15.2%. 15.2%, it is the decarbonization rate that would be required if we really want to achieve 1.5 or limit global warming to 1.5 centigrades. You might say 1.5 is already, too ambitious. Okay, but even if we go to 2 centigrades, which I would say for many Iceland nations will be already a very serious matter, it's still 6.3% of the decarbonization rate that is needed. So we are talking about some very serious changes that need to happen. Now, what we do have right now, COVID was clearly unprecedented as it comes to the drop in CO2 emissions level. It was like 6.4%, but it was like a very temporary drop. What happened in 2021 is that if you want to look at least G20 economies, you will see that the decarbonization rate was at less than 0.5%. So it was the lowest decarbonization level over the decade. So it was fine. We had COVID, and clearly the drop in demand also caused the drop in CO2 level. However, in 2021, we are back on track, and 2022 is exactly the same. So I think we need to almost like rethink again our way of how committed we are to decarbonization efforts. We can go to the next slide. Which shows, okay, so how should we or how could we achieve it? And here I put very interesting chart, in my opinion, from the International Energy Agency that suggests that if we are to go to the net zero scenarios, there are like a couple of areas or couple of strategies that need to be adopted pretty much together for us to get there. So first of all, we need to decarbonize high emitting assets. We also need to make dirty assets cleaner. We need to retire some of dirty assets much earlier. And we need to build low emission. And this low emission is where the technology I was referring to is coming to play. Only this pretty much managed and implemented together is the way for us to get to our net zero ambition scenario. Now we can go to the next slide, which is a little bit, hopefully it's a little bit more optimistic slide. This slide is from our PwC a report that is called PwC State of Cleantech Economy. It was from 2021, and right now we have also the one on 2022 that we will be publishing quite soon, and it is even more optimistic. So if you look at this slide, what it pretty much says that the investment into climate tech startups is increasing year by year, and in 2021 we got to the situation that for every dollars that venture capitalists spent this year, 14 cents went to climate tech, and I think it's a great momentum that we are building, and hopefully we will be building going forward. However, if we go to the next slide, you will see that there is a big gap between where the emissions are really produced versus where the climate tech venture investments have been placed. So pretty much the biggest investments are in mobility, whereas it looks quite obvious that we have like a very significant funding gap in the areas as built environment, food and agriculture, industry manufacturing, and resource management. So this slide, I think, illustrates in a very interesting way how we as globally should be looking at the tech, the future of climate tech, and how potential reallocation of funds to the high emitting areas of businesses should help also with much quicker and hopefully also much more affordable net zero transformation. Let's go to the next slide. Which again, I hope that is a very positive slide. This is the pledges, and we just pull together here just a few institutions or organizations that came together with their pledges about net zero. And of course, probably the most known one is GFANZ, again from COP26 last year, with Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. You know about the $130 trillion assets under management that made they pledge to net zero. Then you will have a couple of other institutions or alliances, and you will see that the numbers, it comes also to the number of members they each have, is quite encouraging. As well, again, as always, the problem is not only about the absolute amount of money, but also about the allocations of this money among different geographies. And this is, I understand, something that will be discussed over the next hours during this meeting, but also allocation between different technologies and also different assets. But I think what is quite positive here is certainly that there are the leading financial institutions around the world who made these pledges and who made it very clear that they want to get on the net zero path, and this net zero transition is part of a business strategies. Of course, you will hear many critics also around it, how quick it is, how serious it is, how much of a commitment versus declaration it really is, but clearly it is the progress in the right direction. We can go to the next slide, and the next slide is around, like the close-up into the Caribbean. I took this one from the corporate governance survey, so I understand this is something that you will be discussing, and you had already like a flashlight of everything that is there in ESG space and corporate governance in the Caribbean. What was interesting for me from the, let's put it maybe more global perspective, is that clearly you are increasing the awareness level, and it is, the 60% of directors who do recognize the financial materiality of ESG and link it to their strategy is a good result. Yes, of course, it could be much better and should be much better, but I think where there is like lots and lots of things to be done is into putting these declarations into real actions. Because if you look at into how much, what is a percentage of directors that report on ESG on the regular basis, then the situation is much worse. And my final slide, so let's go to the next one, is around, so what does it mean to build the economies of tomorrow? And this slide goes much beyond ESG only. Yes, it's not only about climate in particular, but I think it gives like a great like the summary of where we are today. I showed very similar slide, the one of on the countries in the Western Balkans, in Central and Eastern Europe, and the slide was very similar. So I was saying, actually, for us to build economies that will be resilient tomorrow, first of all, we need to focus on collaborations. There is never-ending conversations how to globally make sure that we get from billions to trillions as it comes to climate and climate investments, and clearly public sector will never be able to cover everything. This is where private sector comes into play. On the other hand, private sector needs the right regulation, support, potential risk measurements to be able to invest. And I've also covered this a little bit, like cross-sector collaboration. We are seeing like the increasing convergence between different sectors. That is why the collaboration between these sectors is absolutely essential. The second one is addressing funding gaps, and I would assume that in your part of the world there's a very vivid conversation probably each and every day, how to make sure that we put more emphasis on adaptation finance, how to make sure that also there is a funding that is much needed in the emerging markets and also the markets that are potentially most hit. And I would assume, and hopefully I will have a chance to discuss in a moment with a very honorable guest that I hope we will have a conversation with around how to make sure that this funding is addressed and how you can also look at potential sources of finance. The third one, I think I covered in this short presentation quite broadly, is technology. So I think we need to make sure that we are able to reset our strategies. We are also able to reprioritize our models, our business models. And as it comes to ESG and climate in particular, technology has a huge role to play. And the last one is, I know that these are quite scary times, and I think many governments around the world need to address in very, very urgent short-term goals and concerns. And even having conversation over the last 2 days, I've heard someone saying, actually, if you want to be alive in 10 years, you also need to make sure that you will be alive in 2 years. And I think, unfortunately, this is the life we live it right now. So we need to focus on short-term concerns. However, these long-term goals are very much essential. So things like sustainability should not be a price we are paying because of high energy costs, and these long-term needs should be addressed and very much put into strategies of all governments. As we are we finished, so I finished my presentation. I understand that right now I will be joined by my fantastic guest, Kevin. I hope maybe you will be able to help me right now to somehow connect us, and let's move on and have a conversation.
Yes, Agnes, I can definitely help you out here. We're pivoting once again. I would like now to introduce and welcome Senator the Honorable Matthew Samuda. The Honorable Minister is Jamaica's Minister without portfolio in the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation. Senator Damuda also joins the floor, coming with a very, very rich history and background in terms of also recently attending a meeting here in the Bahamas at the invitation of Prime Minister the Honorable Philip Brave Davis, where the minister and a number of other leaders in the region discussed some initiatives pre-COP27. Minister has also led the initiative to end the use of single-use plastic bags, plastic straws, styrofoam, which was successfully implemented in Jamaica. Minister, we hereby invite you to this honorable house, and we welcome you.
Thank you. It's indeed my privilege to join you this morning.
Good morning.
Forward to the discussion.
Fantastic. So maybe I will take over from Kevin right now. Thank you so much for joining us today. And Kevin helped me a little bit, putting a little bit of a background of what is going on, and clearly preparing for this couple of minutes. I also read about what is going on. And something that drew my attention was clearly your participation in Caribbean regional heads of governments as the preparation for COP27. Why don't we start maybe by you giving us a little bit of an update and insights of where do you see the Caribbean in COP27 and how are you preparing?
So the Caribbean generally participates through the multilateral mechanism of AOSIS. We try to consolidate our positions with other developing nations, not just SIDS, but everyone who is most affected by the scourge of climate change. We've had a number of planning meetings in terms of trying to harmonize our varying positions, both at the regional level, sub-regional level, and of course at the broader AOSIS table. Thus far, I think we're getting to that point. I think we're pretty ready as a region, pretty ready as a block of developing states to have the conversations that need to be had and to sing with one voice. We appreciate the need for multilateral fora like COP. If small nations wouldn't have an equal seat at the table without such multilateral fora. But our voices will be harmonized, and they'll be harmonized around issues such as ease of access to finance, increasing in adaptation finance, and the absolute need for a loss and damage fund of sorts and a mechanism to address that issue. I think that would be the three main pillars that we've spent the time, focusing on and ensuring that our messaging is clear in each of those categories.
Thank you, Minister. I had exactly the same conversation last year, and there was it was after COP. And we were strategizing a little bit, saying actually how things can change and how important it is that smaller nations, and I'm coming from also quite a small nation, have like the common representative and speaker with one voice. So I think it is very much a very wise move as it comes to our voices being collectively heard. Question that I think is quite related to everything that I've said in my intro presentation is, the situation right now generally around the world is quite difficult, quite complex, and clearly the governments have lots on their plate right now. How do you see the role of the governments, especially in the Caribbean right now, in the ESG transformation? I'm referring because, again, preparing for our conversation, I looked at some of in my opinion, very transformational law that you and I understand you were part of preparing and passing the law, like Jamaica Systemic Risk Assessment tool. How do you want to drive the market, and where do you see the biggest role of the government?
The government of Jamaica, and certainly all governments, have to provide leadership and have to articulate a vision. You mentioned we're in particularly unstable times. There are geopolitical challenges. The IPCC reports that are published are frightening. We're dealing with weather catastrophes almost a little too often now, and we're dealing with the slow onset events associated with climate change, the saltwater intrusion, the gradual damage of your coastline and your coastal infrastructure. So government has a responsibility to bring the private sector, bring NGOs, bring the churches, bring all stakeholders in society into its confidence. And one of the ways that I think that is done, and one of the important steps we have to take on the ESG agenda, is ensuring that government is investing in information and data and making that information and data accessible to all stakeholders in society. With information, people can act. Invariably, I think the weakness in the region's approach to this issue 10, 15 years ago was the fact that we just didn't have sufficient data. You knew something was happening. There were some internationally published documents that gave you deep concern and pointed to the need to act. But what was the concern? What was the specific impact we were going to have, and what was required to fix it? I don't think that was clear 10, 15 years ago. It's much clearer now, but there still are some information and data gaps. The region is notorious for being a little behind in getting its information together, making it available to all stakeholders who need it to make decisions. It's why we would have invested so much time and energy in partnering with the CCRI and indeed University of Oxford and GCF in getting our Jamaica Systemic Risk Assessment tool up. It's a tool that's available to all stakeholders. It's taking thousands of data points, and we'll have to stay committed to initiatives such as that, so that you're developing these tools that allow for proper analysis and allow for strategic investments to be made in line with the risks that we face.
That is really great to hear, and maybe I will follow up on this. And I can see that there are some questions coming in, and I will maybe try to tie them in on the questions that I prepared as well. You talked about bringing data and information as a tool to pretty much incentivize. Also, as I understand, businesses to be more efficient in ESG. I'm seeing here a couple of questions around specific topics, like, for example, waste reduction or impact on capital markets. Would you be able to give some insights, maybe not only on Jamaica, but also other countries in the region, of what are the specific sector activities that are driven by the government to really motivate and incentivize private sector in different sectors?
So it's a few questions wrapped up in one, I think. But let me see.
I'm doing my best to address whatever questions are being asked. It is very, very complex question, but please pick whatever the topics and the areas and actions you want to cover.
Well, let me start with the waste issue first. Virtually all nations in the region supported the recent resolution passed at UNEA, which is the United Nations Environmental Assembly, in June or July this year in Kenya. That was a set of resolutions that was targeting one of the main risks we face, which is pollution. That had a series of resolutions on it, one that was targeting plastic pollution in particular. It also took on effluent release, wastewater and sludge concerns as well. The reality is the region has a fiscal capacity issue that's well known, been well articulated and well studied. The region has never been able to buy the amount of rolling stock, as it's called, which is the collection network that you'd need for the waste that we generate. So you start from behind in terms of your ability to collect the waste that's generated by your citizens. There's other issues which contribute to it, including the way that we've developed. In many of our poorer communities, it wasn't developed in a structured manner. So there's accessibility issues as well, which continues to make it makes the issue that much more difficult. That aside, I think there is political and social commitment to deal with the issue. Where I think there's been a gap is, okay, we want to deal with the issue. We don't want to put waste into our waterways. We want to manage our landfills properly. We want to keep clean streets. Question is, how do you do it, and what is the best mechanism for that to be achieved? In a Jamaican context, we believe the waste to energy opportunity provides the fiscal opportunity to pay for it. And that's been the biggest issue. There's no lack of willingness or no lack of interest to ensure that persons are indeed good citizens and your streets are clean, but that's been the big issue. We believe by reserving 60 megawatts of space on our grid for generation from waste to energy, and based on the studies we've done, this should provide the earnings which allows us to collect what we generate. Now, that doesn't mean that everything should still be entering your waste stream, and we're doing a full analysis of exactly how our waste stream is comprised, how it relates to consumption patterns, and determining what you don't want to enter into your waste stream. So for instance, things like microplastics in personal care products is something we've decided we don't want entering our waste stream or our waterways. We'll be moving to ban those towards the end of the calendar year. But there are other issues and other toxic materials which are difficult and can't be dealt with by way of waste to energy. So it's a multi-layered approach. You really do have to put in modern landfills, but there has to be a way to cover the cost of dealing with it. The waste to energy model will work in Jamaica. With some of our smaller neighbors, it's a little difficult because they don't have the volume that's necessary to support a plant in that manner. That I think requires a lot more thought in terms of how do you do composting, how do you manage to develop a circular economy with your plastics, etc., to reduce the impact on collection and storage. That is something that we have to contemplate. As it relates to the capital markets and how they respond to companies that approach things through ESG evaluation, I think the world has changed. Your process for evaluating investment opportunities has to take on the fact that climatic risk is real. It's not some future concept. The reality is our climate has changed. Our weather patterns have become more erratic. You get in some afternoon showers where 30 days worth of rain fall in 30 minutes, and then you have 30 days of drought or 30 days of dryness after. It's creating a difficulty in planning because of how erratic our weather patterns have become. I can't see any business being successful without looking at its investments through the ESG lens. And I think the markets are going to respond to that. Whether it should be something legislated or it should be a part of the government's evaluation of how companies are performing, I think that will come over time. But I think certainly as a private investor, I wouldn't be looking at any stock that doesn't look of a company that doesn't look through ESG lens for making its investments.
Thank you, Minister. And another topic I've found quite interesting, you were talking in relation to waste to energy of limited fiscal capacities. And I think it is probably not only for any specific projects or type of projects, it is generally, limited funding capabilities of the nations. How do you see the role of international donors, international institutions in helping you bridge this funding gap?
So our inability to manage waste and manage our pollution space impacts the international community. We're small islands and we have, I think, far too high leakage into the ocean from our waste stream. That affects all of our neighbors, rich and poor. With that considered, I think there's always a role for multilateral support for developing nations. This is an area that affects all of us if we don't get it right. So I think it should be prioritized more. Admittedly, I've found from IDPs great appetite for the conversation. I'm not sure that it has translated quite to the investment that we want yet, but my own sense of working with IDPs is that they're very interested in making these investments going forward. What those projects look like and whether it's sustainable support or single injections, that remains to be seen. But I definitely think there's a significant role. It is a responsibility, and it does affect them also.
And I wouldn't maybe just focus only on international institutions, but generally, mitigation, funding gap, and everything that comes to this. I would assume that for your part of the world, it is also something that is extremely important. And I think you would want to comment on in this area.
So, Jamaica is very serious about its mitigation targets. We were the 11th country in the world to submit our updated NDCs. We also have started considering the land use component and how we manage forestry in our NDCs. Now, mitigation targets are primarily going to be met by taking heavy fuel oil generating capacity, moving it into cleaner sources, preferably renewables, but where not suitable, into gas. We have set an ambitious target. The Prime Minister has been clear that his target is 50%. Now, there's some harmonization of some of our declarations that needs to come to catch up to that 50%. But generally, we're working to make sure that all of our documents, all of our commitments, internationally and local, reflect this 50% ambition. That's a challenge by 2030. It's a challenge both because of funding, and it's a challenge also because the markets are out of sync. Even when you have projects that are funded, you're having challenges getting the equipment for renewables because of supply chain challenges, which then delays, you don't get the benefits of the savings that you want as quickly to pay for the other conversions that you want to do from that perspective. But admittedly, I believe that the funding gap is much easier to make up with mitigation efforts, certainly for energy production, than it is on the adaptation front. I believe the funding will keep pace with what we need to do for 2030. I think the issue will be, will it come in a little later than it needs to, and then there's an unholy rush and you're not necessarily onboarding the cleaner energy in an orderly way, in the way that you'd want to. So I think there will be challenges, but I think we'll make that gap. Certainly there's a great appetite for energy investment from the private sector. I think once we get our Electricity Act modernized and create a framework that allows for persons to put in that sort of investment, I think that will flow, and we could see ourselves surpassing that 50% target.
Related question to funding and financing, I would assume as well that came from our audiences. Is the government considering any tax incentives as it comes to major investments?
So I think the government's approach generally has been that we need to get the basics right, and that investment will come. Now, that doesn't negate the need for incentives, but we've been largely focused on ensuring that we're de-risking investments for investors. So our infrastructure is being approached in a strategic, sensible manner that will provide long-term stability for where persons want to invest. We're taking a holistic look at other issues, your national security concerns, your energy concerns. And we're also taking a very serious look at the climate risks and providing that data to all those who wish to invest in a manner that we believe leads the region. The JSRAC tool is one such point of evidence. So that tool, the way we are approaching our investment into our national security architecture, supports that point. And I think beyond that, if you look at what we're doing in our energy sector, persons should be much clearer that Jamaica is a place to look for investment opportunity. Now, that said, there are some points of uncompetitiveness. And in those cases, I think we have to tailor incentive strategies that work. But we've also been lowering the bar in a number of areas. You'd have noticed the new EV policy, which allows persons to get into EVs. We've changed the tax structure for importation of EVs. We've changed the tax structure, tax rates rather, also for solar panels and batteries. We're lowering the barriers. It depends on the particular investment, and I think you'll have to look almost on a case-by-case basis what incentives are required by industry to mobilize additional capital faster.
Thank you ever so much. It sounds like a structure that is carefully thought through, and certainly there will be many more things to consider in the future. Minister, I was quite skeptical for us to having 20 minutes for our fire chat conversation, but I think we managed. Thank you so much for your insights, and I will give the floor back to Kevin. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Agnieszka, and thank you very much. Thanks to both Minister, actually, and Agnieszka for your contributions. Minister mentioned singing with one voice, and I know that, Agnieszka, based on our interactions pre-COP26, you also subscribe exactly to that as it relates to the region. So we look forward to seeing how that develops, particularly as we go into COP27. So as we reach the halfway mark and we go into an 8-minute coffee break, and literally the only thing between your coffee break is me right now, I figured I'd end with a bit of light humor. So for most of you, as I mentioned during the welcome, this is a week-long activity, particularly for PwC, with some of our internal upskilling. And as a part of the upskilling, we've introduced the metaverse. So the Caribbean region and our staff, colleagues within the PwC network have been involved with interacting within the metaverse. So I had a very interesting question yesterday raised by one of my managers. He looked at me and he said, look, I'm in the metaverse right now, and I have one question for you, Kevin. We have the universe and the metaverse. Is it possible to migrate my problems that I have in the universe to the metaverse? So to that I responded, hopefully by the end of the presentation today, I'll have that answer. So that said, everyone, please take a break, 8 minutes, and we'll resume. I ask you not to log off because we actually do have some very interesting videos that we'll be running during the interim as well. So thank you very much, and we'll reconvene in about 7.5 minutes. Thank you.
We're taught that 1 + 1 = 2. Simple, right? But today's world isn't simple. So, what happens if we look at it from a new angle? Could we make something greater? If we bring together human ingenuity, passion, and experience with the latest technology, we start to make something more. Something we can see in people's lives and feel in the world around them. Building trust for today and tomorrow. And that's the thing. We all know the math, but we need a new way to put it together. Which means we don't just find answers. We never stop looking for them. A passionate community of solvers, coming together in unexpected ways, creating new solutions for a new day. That's the new equation.
We found that investment in climate tech in the first half of 2021 nearly exceeded the entirety of the investment that was made in 2020. Climate tech brings together the innovative approaches and solutions needed to decarbonize all sectors across the global economy. Over the past 12 months, we've seen really big commitments from both governments and businesses, but we know we need to move from just making those commitment statements to actual action. We're seeing mobility as the most heavily invested in sector. It's being driven by investor excitement around technologies like electric and hydrogen vehicles and new business models which address shared and micro-mobility. It's not to say that other sectors aren't also growing rapidly. So things like food, agriculture, land use and energy are the next largest areas. It's hard to pick on any one area that's going to be the winner of the future, but we think that anywhere where you can combine technology and innovation to take that carbon out of society, you'll get a real value creation impact. So areas like, say, new battery technologies to support the rollout of renewables, or low greenhouse gas alternatives to, the hard to abate concrete, iron and steel are the areas that for me are really exciting. It's really now a time for action. And in taking that action, we really need to be brave, because some of those necessary changes are going to be difficult for everybody, for governments and for the private sector. But the cost of us doing nothing is too high.
Okay, welcome back. We now segue into the segment of the topic of climate change in business. Joining us now is Nicole Rotman. Nicole is a seasoned visionary and values-driven leader with 20 years of experience in building organizations, creating services and tools, and securing business success. Her focus is on climate and sustainability, grounded in a track record of strategy consulting, innovation, operations, financial risk management, and change management. Nicole drives innovation at the intersection with the ecosystem with a strong focus on co-development. Nicole has co-built PwC Germany's climate group, Lumnix, the co-firm, and McKinsey's energy efficient service line. We welcome you, Nicole. Thank you.
For having me. I'm looking forward for an interesting discussion and absolutely for my check-in and conversation that I'll be having with Gail after this brief presentation. Thank you so much. So let me jump right in. I was asked to talk a bit about the relevance for business out of kind of what we're discussing in ESG and in climate change. I'll take climate change as one core element. Why? Because everything that we see happening with climate will happen with ESG more broadly. And let's jump right in. We have, I would say, two major disruptions in the ESG pathway. The first one is, historically, we've been talking about baselining. So what was the impact of a company that happened in the past? How much water did we consume? How much emissions did we have? What was our pollution track record? And we might have realized that we weren't very strong on that, but it was more like backward-looking and a backward-looking accounting task. This has moved substantially into not just looking at the own operations, but also at the supply chain. And it has become a lot more sophisticated. So we have more standards in the room. The ambition levels are higher on reporting. We see in many geographies that auditing is required increasingly to these numbers as well. So that's one major step forward in the quality of any backward-looking elements and thoughts. Now where it's really getting interesting is when we move into the forward-looking. And the forward-looking is both on the side of commitments that I'm making as a business. So what is my contribution to biodiversity in the future for climate, quite straightforward. We had that previously in this session today. What is my net zero commitment? So suddenly I'm not just having a random figure of liters of water consumed or emissions that nobody really has an idea what it means, but suddenly we have some like an anchor, a mental anchor that is net zero. So do I and how do I commit to net zero, and what does that imply then for my own strategy moving forward? So that obviously can't be answered solely from a qualitative standpoint. So we're also moving into the financial relevance of ESG, and in this instance, climate very, very specifically. That has two dimensions as well. It has the dimension of if the world is changing and I'm not, what is the financial impact? But at the same time, if I pursue a net zero strategy, how does that make me as a business more successful? And all of these horizons that we're just discussing are evolving for ESG factors as well. We see a lot of that being driven out of the European Commission, but with the alignment with the ISSB and their double materiality discussion, we can expect that this is not where the journey is ending, with the SEC picking up more closely on climate-related and ESG-related disclosure. And looking at the APEC developments, we can for sure assume that there's going to be, let's at least say, a lot more dynamic, and what is more critical, a lot more transparency in the market on what companies are committing to and where they're heading. So the way that we typically think about structuring that type of work and thinking about making it tangible for companies is along what we call an ESG or climate house, if we move one slide ahead. So whenever you're building a strategy on ESG, please consider from the start that you might start with your impact net zero point. You might start with your risk and opportunity analysis, but in the end, both are deeply intertwined. So it's fine to start with one or the other. Let me just give you an example. If for example, I'm committed to net zero and I'm doing a climate risk and opportunity analysis, what would happen if the world were changing, if we were transforming to a 1.5 degree world? My results will be drastically different if I'm already on that pathway or if I'm not. Just looking at increasing energy prices, carbon prices, but also availability of raw materials, that I would start to shield myself relatively in an SBTI or net zero pathway, but wouldn't if I would assume the world to kind of heat up more. So deeply intertwined, one of the best practices. Now, these were two theoretical concepts. Let's go into business relevancy and the money. I've brought two examples with me, one on transition, one on physical risk. The maps that you're seeing here is out of a tool that we're using. It's a HazMap. It just shows you which hazards will be increasing significantly under current climate modeling if we were stuck in a current stage of economic weakness, where we might turn back some of the measures we have for mitigation that have already been in place. We might not fulfill the regulatory commitments or the country commitments that have been made. So we need to detract a bit from where we are today, but it gives you a pretty good view on where hotspots are. And if I look at the Caribbean, obviously data modeling is limited, but just looking at the surrounding countries and regions gives you kind of a view that it's not going to be negligible, right? So just the hazard frequency of tropical cyclones, drought events, convective storms will see levels that we have that are unprecedented. And this is 2030. For climate physical risk, we see the highest records on damage basically every 2 years in the insurance industry since a couple of years. So we know it's already going on and it's already happening. Let me give you some financial numbers as well. If we move one slide ahead, that's research from Swiss Re here. If we look at just physical risks, building on the research that they have been performing, we would expect for the world a GDP loss of 10%, and that's obviously without adaptation. For Latin America, which is the next region that is modeled, the GDP loss is estimated at 17%. So that is nothing that you would want to neglect, even if you would argue that your business might not be vulnerable to physical risks. But the economic damages that are increasing here and that are illustrated here will have broader economic impacts that will, in fact, be relevant for all types of business models that you can imagine. If we look at the transition side, when we talk about climate transition, we're basically talking about images as the next one. So reduction curves, if we move one slide ahead, please. So basically reduction curves, what is that illustrating? Imagine you have a major macroeconomic model where your input is population growth and GDP growth across the globe. That is then linked to economic sectors and economic sector performance and growth trajectories. And then on this kind of pathway that should be going up, we place basically technologies, regulation, etc., that allows us to decrease emissions while still achieving population growth and GDP growth factors. So there's a mix of regulation that's required, market demand, trends, etc., but obviously technological solutions that are required by sector to get us down there. So also transition risk is pretty clearly described. We're talking about relative price changes, availability changes, for example, for green steel, which already is a massive problem today. So very, very tangible changes in the economy that, if we look at the supply chain comment that I made on the first slide, will also hit a lot of businesses that do not expect to be vulnerable at this point in time. Making that tangible as well in terms of financial numbers, we did some modeling on the MSCI, just one illustration, and it's MSCI, it's global, but even on the MSCI on the next slide, on a 1.5 degree pathway, if companies that are currently in the MSCI wouldn't be acting to 2030, the kind of fundamental value loss that we would be seeing is some 6.5%. And that's a standard index with a lot of technology in it already, so a lot of balancing that is happening. Now, I've talked a bit about the kind of negative view and the bad news. Let me move to the good news a bit. If we move to the next slide, it's so easy to talk about it when we consider transition. What you're seeing here is what would be needed in terms of investments and in which sectors to allow us to transition. That sounds very technical and it might not be speaking to everybody. Behind that basically is an investment requirement of 3 to 4.5% of GDP annually till 2030. So massive amount of money that would need to go in there. What you're talking about as well is employment development. So if you look at modeling such as ILO, this is a business case that is positive. It's not destroying jobs, but it's creating jobs. And it is a case where there's some kind of obvious quick wins around infrastructure, hydrogen, potentially LNG, CCUs, etc. It also implies massive changes in a lot of companies as they're already in operations today. So changes in efficiency, changes in production models, changes in the way that we run our buildings. So building values, we've done some analyses on building valuation impacts, which are dramatic. And that comes in combination, let me just stop by that. It comes in combination with kind of physical risk that we'll also be seeing even if we are transitioning. So we've done a major study with 22 leading global insurance companies. And for them, this is serious stuff that it's already there also on the physical side. So we are facing discussions on what do I insure, but on the positive side also on where are new products that will be needed, both in health insurance, for example, but also product insurance moving forward. So why are we discussing this? We can still say in terms of, at least coming from Europe, the Ukraine crisis, the general economic downturn, is that still relevant? Are we still going there? We see money being extracted from green funds, for example. We see that funds are missing or not allocated appropriately. So is this still relevant and should we care today? Not just sometime in 2030, but is it relevant for me today? And I would love to have a quick conversation with you on tipping points. If we move to the next slide, please. So you see tons of logos, lots of initiative. Let me break it down to you to very few points. Number one, we have 90% of global GDP committed to net zero. Even if we're not achieving that, and even if out of the 90, we might just have 60% of global GDP acting, we already see massive implications through supply chains that are driven by climate commitments. And we can surely expect that there will be tipping points where the valuation of assets is changing dramatically. The financial services clients we are working with are already starting to reprice assets, to review and redo their risk modelings to make sure that they're capturing that. And they are, of course, looking desperately at where are the growth opportunities if I need to start reshifting my portfolios. So 90%. Financial services industry. Second driver, we have about 50% of global financial assets under management and 50% of global balance sheets committed to net zero. There again, there might be delays. Not everybody might achieve their targets. But if you have 50% of the global financial sector in terms of money acting and asking clients and putting pressure, that has quite a significant effect in terms of creating transparency and also on the way that financial industries are understanding what is happening in companies and where and how their value and their risk modeling and assessment needs to change in the future. We've talked about regulation previously, so let me stay with ISSB for a moment. Just imagine the impact that it would have to talk about not just a water target, but quite specifically on a net zero target, a transformation pathway, money you want to spend to make that transition successful. We have talked about whether or not, as PwC, whether or not we can audit such plans, transition plans. Elements that we have for auditing these plans are, do we have a board decision? Is the money there to make that change happen? Are the investment volumes estimated well enough, or is it really offline? Are the measures that the companies are taking, are they generally just fit to make sure that the transition would happen that has been decided on? So you can imagine just the rigor of the dialogue that comes into the system globally, and that will define and redefine kind of the competitive pecking order within sectors and between sectors to some extent. I'd like to close with something really technical, just to give you a view of what we are talking about right now. And then I have 3 last highlights. So moving to page 10. This now is getting really technical stuff. Why am I showing this to you? We discussed the level of sophistication that is starting to materialize in the financial services industry, driven by stress tests, driven by financial sector regulation. A lot of that is really stress tests. And we do have a central bank network by now comprising more than 110 entities globally. I've never seen something to such an extent, who are driving scenario analysis for climate-related risks and opportunities. So what are you seeing here? This is one example of a company that how financial actors could think about dissecting a company. And they could do it by looking at sector requirements in terms of growth technologies, looking at EBITDA implications. That's some of the modeling we do as well. EBITDA implications, if you put that company as it is today under stress of a net zero pathway and a high physical risk pathway, putting the company under stress under the assumption that they are investing and changing or not investing and changing, and then break it down to, is the transition path that they are laying out, is it good enough for net zero? And what specifically are the technologies that will be invested in? What are the resulting opportunities out of a financing or investment thought? And where are the company's risks? So what would I no longer want to have on my balance sheet as a bank, for example, that I might want to get out of and know before everybody else in the market is knowing this? So the dialogue that is starting to happen here is on a level that is unprecedented in terms of level of detail. Of course, it's always focused. And that's also one of the key messages that I would still like to leave with you if we move to page 11, please. So number one being, it's always around materiality. So everything we're looking at in the climate space and each and every ESG space is around materiality. The task, a lot of the reactions around in Europe, around the CSRD, where this is absolutely not doable to look at all ESG drivers and provide some type of a financial assessment. It's just simply not solvable. We don't have the data. We don't have the IT. We can't really deal with that. However, if you boil it down to materiality, what is it where my business really has an impact? What is it where I'm really at risk, or where are my major opportunities to realize in the end, it's a shift in the strategic discussion, but it is handleable. And that's at least our experience across a range of transformations that we were able to support. Secondly, it is a full business transformation. And I would love to leave that with you also as a kind of thought. If you want to engage on the journey, don't just leave it with somebody in sustainability. These poor people will be struggling hard. Think about it as, what are the business units that are concerned? What is the strategic outlook that is concerned? Build cross-functional teams from the start to have a learning in the entire organization and make it much easier to implement these types of changes in your entire organization, instead of realizing, and we have that as well, 2-3 years later, how fundamental it is what we're talking about. And please don't forget, it's a major opportunity. The entire debate has been changing over the past 15 years from, why would I care? Oh my God, the regulation is coming. Ooh, I realize it's a risk. And now it's tipping towards, it's a major opportunity. How can I be part of that opportunity? So much more positive spin that we're seeing in the debate, but obviously starting a race for value creation in the market, which is really interesting to see, and which puts this topic on the C-level agenda if it hadn't arrived there previously. And with that, I would love to close. If there's any questions, we can either pick them up now, or Gail, I'm so excited to start the conversation with you here, and we might pick them up while we're moving along.
Thank you very much, Nicole. And similarly, as we did with the minister, we'll be introducing a bit of a fireside chat. So I'd like to introduce now Gail Moss-Solomon, who is an attorney at law with an extensive experience in the legal field. Prior to joining Grace Kennedy, Ms. Moss-Solomon was the legal and regulatory director and the company secretary for Digicel Jamaica, with responsibility for the Turks and Caicos and Cayman Islands, and formed part of Digicel Jamaica Limited's executive management team. She was also a partner at the firm Harrison & Harrison and held senior positions in the Attorney General's chambers. We now welcome Gail. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gail. I'm so excited that we have that conversation. So obviously...
Thank you, Nicole and Kevin, for that lovely intro.
Obviously, you've done some pre-reading, and I was quite impressed to see that you have all the Sustainable Development Goals captured in the report that you've shared. So I'm really excited to start that conversation with you. Let me start by asking, how did this kind of come along? How did you deal with this multitude of objectives, imperfect objectives that are out there?
We're still on the journey, Nicole. It's very much a labor of love for GK, but it's been somewhat organic because this is a very, I don't know if you know, but this is a very special year for Grace Kennedy. We're celebrating 100 years. I don't know if you can see my pin there. So we were founded. We were founded in 1922. And we like to say on February 14th. So we like to say that we were a company that was born in love, and we continue with that we care ethos. So it's really embedded in our DNA in that we care about the communities we serve. We care about our employees in a very significant way. And we care about providing good services, financial services and food. That's really, what we do. We are headquartered in Jamaica still, but we're really a multinational organization with operations in over 30 countries worldwide. We distribute food across the world, but we have manufacturing and distribution in Canada, UK, USA, and across Europe and across the Caribbean. And then financial services we provide in Jamaica and across the Caribbean. So we're proud of that. But I think this ESG journey was a sort of natural progression from our robust CSR framework. So we have two foundations who do a lot of great work in the areas of the environment, health, community development, and even our business entities. It's not just the foundation's work. Our employees are heavily involved, and our businesses in kind of carrying out this we care ethos that we're very proud of. So it was a natural progression for us. And your presentation was really eye-opening and inspiring because it shows that we're on the right track, but that we still have a lot of work to do. So.
Sorry for that.
That's fine. It's a journey.
Absolutely. And that's exactly the spirit to take that, I would say. And if I look at your sectors, food, financial services, you mentioned also health concerns. These are like right in the center of a lot of the major ESG discussions that are going on, right? How did you get your arms around it? Maybe in terms of very practical recommendations for somebody who wants to start the journey, but might be overwhelmed by the expected complexity.
Right. So for us, because of the diversity of our business, it would make it more challenging. So even our alignment with the UN SDGs, for example, had to be quite diverse because we wanted to ensure that there was something relatable for all of our business units. We have a supermarket chain in Jamaica, for example, Hilo. We have our manufacturing division. We also have insurance. We have a bank. We have Western Union. We're exclusive partners for Western Union in the Caribbean region. So we are so diverse. And so we had to start, and I think I like to say a lot of it was organic. We had to start with what was important to our key stakeholders, our employees, who are a representative of our wider stakeholder group, or our consumers, our customers. And so that is really the approach that we took to look at what was important to our employees and build on those values. So, for example, last year, we codified our energy policy group-wide, which was already in practice, and we're very policy-driven. It was already in practice, but we took the opportunity to codify it so that all our stakeholders across the group could look at best practices for manufacturing, for any new plant builds, anything that needs to be done that has an energy component to ensure that we're utilizing best practices and staying true to our commitment for a better world, essentially.
Excellent. Sounds great. And I love your point around policies as well. That's always, if you look at requirements, it's always something that comes up, right? How do you make it tangible? Not leave it with a commitment, but make it really tangible.
Yes.
At the same time, when you move into something that's tangible, that's where the discussion starts, right? Why do we want to do this? Isn't that painful? What do we have out of that?
Isn't it expensive?
Exactly. That's right. How was that for you? How was your time when you were developing this?
Yes, so we're still developing, and I have to, this year we were very proud. So I'll tell you a story on how this, how we came to produce our first report, our first ESG report this year, our impact report, which we published with our annual report this year. And I really have to thank the PwC team, Carolyn Bell and Janice Narona, who is on now, who really gave us a great deal of support in producing that report. But how this came about was our group CEO, which, any initiative really starts with leadership. And our group CEO, who is a senator in Jamaica, was making comments in the Senate with respect to some changes to our legislation, the Companies Act. And he, in his research, raised the point in the Senate, many things in relation to the regulations governing companies. But he's a bit of a pioneer. He was instrumental in the formation of the Junior Stock Exchange many years ago. So when he was doing his research around the regulations governing companies in Jamaica and the region, he brought to the fore the fact that more regional companies should be reporting on their ESG framework. And that, of all the comments that he made around the regulations, that was what got the most traction. That is what persons on social media, in the press, really latched onto. So, of course, he came back from that presentation early last year, and said, Gail and team, we're going to lead from the front. We are going to produce an ESG report this year on what we have been doing and what our commitment is. And so that is how we ended up. And it makes sense for us because we have a mantra in GK that what gets measured gets done. So we are proud of our environmental commitments, our commitments to community, our robust governance framework. But we recognize that it was important for us to share this with the public, share it with all of you, so that you can hold us accountable and so that we could develop metrics that could be tracked across the organization, that all our employees could buy in and feel a part of this process. And then we continue to report on it annually. So that's the genesis. You now know exactly how we started. And we have big plans for the future. So,
and I think it's really inspiring, and it underlines two major elements, right? The one, well, maybe three. The one is it has to be top-led. The other one is it requires some courage to start out, and it's really a leap of faith from the start. And there will be a lot of the discussions around we don't have the data, it's not there yet, etc. Right. So, and that is getting us to three, the controlling measurement point that you mentioned. It's great that you took the leap of faith and the courage to just say, we'll move ahead and there will be something. And now we can take it and work with it and digest and develop. That's really great. We often get this question around what does it cost? What is our benefit, right? Linking a bit to this entire double materiality analysis, which is more vague for people than everything else. Did you have that conversation? Where's your mind on that or your experience on that?
So yes, we are certainly having the conversation. So So we talked a little bit about where we are on the journey, and that for us, it has been a bit organic and essentially coming from within. So it's about us tracking what we're already doing, which is what we were able to report on for 2021. And we're proud of those achievements. You know, we're proud of our diversity. We're proud of, we have over 60% of our management team is female. 1/3 of our board of directors is female. The core executive committee, which comprises of Don Webby, our CEO, Andrew Masado, our CFO, and the heads of our divisions. So we have our foods division, we have Frank James, and we have Andrea Coy. We also have Grace Burnett and Stephen Whittingham. We have our chief human resources officer. So my point is that half of the core executive and myself as a general counsel, half of the core executive team is actually female. You know, we're proud of those sorts of things. So it wasn't so difficult for us to pull together. You know, last year we spent nearly 200 million Jamaican dollars in community development across the group. So we're proud of that work, and we were able to report on that. But Nicole, you're absolutely right. It goes further than that. And I see a question coming in. It goes further than that, and we have to expand to these bigger questions, such as what are our partners doing? Are we ensuring that our partners are using these sustainable practices that we are committed to? Are they providing a safe working environment for their employees in the same way that we are committed to? And we are very much on that journey with our partners. In terms of, yes, we are doing work to mitigate our impact on the environment, and now we have to broaden that discussion, which is what you touched on in your presentation. And I need some of those graphs to present to my team. So, you know, we've had for over a decade a very robust enterprise risk management framework that reports into the board of directors and the executive committee that I mentioned, led by Judith Chung and Jaron Thomas in the corporate office with team members across the group. And one of the things that we are, of course, looking at is climate change and the impact on our business. It's a significant risk. You know, we are food people. So, you know, it has a very practical impact on our supply chain. We are, in fact, in farming ourselves. We also have a financial services division that is largely comprised of general insurance. So we're doing a great deal of modeling and assessing the environment in that regard. So to answer your question, it's a journey. We are on that journey. And yes, there are many significant challenges, but I think the important thing is for us to codify. So to publish, to develop the metrics, to track them, and then, of course, keep publishing them so that our stakeholders can hold us accountable and really watch our progress. You know, the ESG framework, we last year started looking at our 2030 vision. You know, what do we want to be in the next 10 years, less than 10 years? And the ESG framework is a huge part of that. And we see, yes, that there are risks, and yes, there are challenges, but we also see opportunities.
Yeah, lovely. And thank you for picking up another of these kind of key points that we often see. While you might decide to start with reporting, it will move into strategy. There's no way not to do that, right? And ideally, they are intertwined from the start. So very, very good point. Let me just pick up on one last thing, because often in our client conversations, when they've taken the leap of faith, they have started modeling, they are coming out with some type of reporting, but internally they always have a lot more. Another key concern is now we're going out to the market, and maybe some of our customers might not react nicely, or a supply chain might not react nicely. We don't want to bother them in asking them nasty questions. What's your stance on that?
Yeah, it's a challenge, and there is always that that sort of tussle and tension between having this vision and strategy, and then the implementation is challenging. But we have that in all areas of the business, right? So I go back to our risk management framework, which really and our risk appetite, which really governs the way that we do business. And so in all things, we look at the risk versus the reward. We look at whether we can implement any mitigating strategies. So if we do have a supplier who is our best and preferred supplier, but unfortunately they are not aligned, then a part of our approach has to be understanding the alternatives that are out there. And maybe it will not be an immediate switch, which, again, our stakeholders hold us accountable. It may not be an immediate switch, but we certainly will have, as part of our 2030 vision, to get to where we need to get to, we will have that in train for changing to another supplier, for example. So there are challenges, and there is always the tension between the ensuring profitability while putting all of these sort of strategies in place. But you're right, Nicole, it's about ensuring that the discussion is happening at the right level.
Yeah.
And that it really forms part of our strategy, and that the leadership and the entire organization buys into that bigger picture.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's also this switch of the discussion, right? Previously, the debate was, why do I need to do it? And now the question comes up of, what happens if I don't do it? So what does it mean to me? And often the losses are much higher than what you can gain when you proactively move. Lovely. Thank you for raising that. There's a question in the chat. For some reason, I can't see it. Kevin, may I ask you to jump in with a bit of the moderation on the questions from the panel, so from the audience, so that we can pick those up as well, as I don't see them.
Yes, there's a question to please explain carbon credits and how local businesses can access the credits.
So there was a previous question, Kevin, around governance and to do with our previous CEO and Chairman Douglas Orain, even before that carbon credits question. Are you seeing that one?
Do you want to pick that up directly?
Yes. So the question says, for Gail, GK has always led in this space, starting with Mr. Orain as chair and CEO decades ago, a decade ago, when no other companies were interested in governance. How much has the GK board supported the ESG genesis of the group? So that's a great question, and it really ties into our governance framework for ESG, for Grace Kennedy. So yes, we are quite proud to be real leaders in the corporate governance space. I mean, it's something that we take very seriously, and we had our Grace Kennedy 100th anniversary lecture last week, and in fact, Douglas Orain spoke. And one of the things he mentioned was that when we were looking to expand internationally, we recognized that our partners wanted to partner with a company that they could trust. So, our principles of honesty, integrity, and trust were very important, but we needed to show more than that. And so our governance framework was very critical. And so we did a lot of work in shoring up our governance framework. So when we embarked on the ESG journey, we took a similar approach. We adopted the International Sustainability Standards Board framework for governance for ESG. So I am the lead, and I report to the executive committee and the corporate governance and nomination committee of the board. To answer your question, the Grace Kennedy board, we really have an excellent board of directors. They have been fully bought in on this journey. And they have always managed that very good balance between, of course, ensuring that there is a sustainable and profitable business, with also ensuring that we focus on these other areas that really do matter, such as this robust ESG framework. So I think because of the type of company that we are and the robust governance framework that we have had in place for decades, I think that it made this ESG journey that much easier in terms of buy-in from the very top and being able to implement. So thanks for that question. The other one about carbon credits. Is that question for me? There's a question about carbon credits and
yes,
how
we actually could defer that one because that's going to come into play a bit more in the segment right after you. So we'll stick a pin in that one and definitely address it.
Okay. Are there other questions that we want to pick up at this point?
I'm not seeing any others, Nicole.
Lovely. Let me reflect on the governance point maybe briefly. You might see kind of one scandal after the other hitting the newspapers around greenwashing. And I was just in a preparation for a panel of financial service providers who are coming out of Germany. So the level of nervousness, you can feel it in the room. And this discussion around, we're still missing some of the standards to really know what we can say and what we can't.
Yes.
How do you perceive this?
You know, that is a great question. And that is one of the significant challenges. It's just the lack of guidance, the lack of benchmarking, particularly for a Grace Kennedy in the range of businesses that we're in and based in the Caribbean region. You know, there's not a great deal of comparative analysis that we can rely on and say, well, here are a few companies that are advanced in this journey, and so we can sort of learn from them. And of course, it is hugely daunting when you see what's happening in the press as you try to embark on something that is hugely positive, but then results in such negative backlash. So, you know, one of our and it's even more relevant to us at Grace Kennedy because a part of our 2030 vision, apart from, you know, tripling or profitability, is to list on an international stock exchange. So currently we're listed on the Jamaica Stock Exchange and on the Trinidad and Tobago Stock Exchange. And part of our 2030 vision is to be listed on an international stock exchange. So we need to get our ducks in a row in terms of exactly what our reporting framework looks like, what exactly we're tracking, and what we are publishing to ensure that we are in line with those international reporting, the SASB's, the IFRS standards across the world. So it is daunting, but you know, again, I have to really congratulate PwC for leading in this space because we are confident that we will find the right partners. We might not have all the expertise internally because it's a developing area, but we are confident that we will find the right partners to really give us the proper guidance and to keep us out of that, you know, putting on my general counsel and head of PR and communications hat, to keep us out of that negative press space.
Thank you so much for this great conversation, for the leap of faith that you're showing, for the positive note that you're having. It's about getting started. It's about, yes, get the ducks in a row, but it's doable. We can get there. Thank you for that. And thank you for sharing the insights of how you experienced the journey so far. I think it's hugely valuable for anybody listening. So greatly appreciated. Thanks so much.
Okay, you're most welcome, Nicole, and thank you all. Thanks, Kevin.
No, thank you very much, Gail, and also Nicole, obviously, for the presentation before, and then obviously the fireside chat. Some key takeaways, obviously, the whole idea that climate commitments and evaluation of assets have come to the floor, risk modeling and evaluating growth opportunities, That statistic you placed regarding 50% of global balance sheets committing to net zero was an interesting one. And then also, Gail, speaking to some of the challenges in terms of putting strategies in place. I think those resonated with me. And I think those are really a lot of the matters that we see in the field coming around as well. We're now going to segue into a very brief video. And to just give some context, we're now pivoting now more so into the realm of ESG reporting and disclosures. So before the video, and the video will be hosted by Nadia Picard, who's actually one of our global reporting leaders. You look at reporting and you look at regulation. You look at various jurisdictions in the region, the Bahamas, for example, with our Carbon Credit Initiatives Bill 2022. And then you look at the Bermuda Monetary Authority, BMA. These are examples of where regulation now is stepping in, even at a regional and local jurisdiction level. So I think those are important, particularly when we look outward and see the SEC, US GAAP, ISSB, IFRS. In fact, IFRS, ISSB have issued 2 proposals already. And obviously, as these agencies get together, I'm speaking about the SEC, GAAP, IFRS, realistically, they're seeking to harmonize a lot of what's being required from a disclosure perspective. So that said, you will see things like materiality once those are all ironed out. My prediction is that you will see more of these disclosures come to the floor, and it will transform in some levels the landscape of financial reporting and disclosure. So that said, now I'd like us to get into the video, and subsequent to that, I'll be introducing our next 2 presenters. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Nadia Picard, Global Reporting Leader of PwC, looking after corporate reporting, the future of corporate reporting, our services around helping companies implementation and assurance. As we all know, the business landscape is changing rapidly to respond to climate and broader ESG challenges, and the globalization of sustainability reporting standards is a fundamental lever to supporting global change. We firmly believe that the coming together of standards is the right thing to do, reducing fragmentation and improving comparability, leveraging the best of the existing standards to help users make more informed decisions that will change outcomes for businesses and our future. As new reporting requirements take shape, stakeholders are already asking businesses right now for more transparency on how they are affected by sustainability and ESG issues, and what are they doing about it? And with so much effort being put into reporting, how can businesses benefit from sustainability reporting? Is it simply about complying with requirements? Well, partly, but compliance is not the full picture. This is more than reporting. It's about outcomes. And companies benefit from preparing sustainability reporting in 2 ways. And one, they build trust with the capital markets and their stakeholders by being transparent about the risks and opportunities facing the business and how these are being managed. Secondly, they may uncover issues with the business that help them inform their decision making and can even help them identify areas for transformation by their strategy. By taking reporting seriously, companies can identify and manage the drivers of their long-term economic value, as well as the risks to value creation. It can help them to see the impact on the world around them. In the last year, there have been significant changes internationally driving global responses to climate and sustainability reporting. The establishment of the ISSB at COP26 1 year ago, and since then, their issuing of 2 exposure drafts on climate and reporting presentation. These are the start of a wider suite of international reporting guidelines. At the same time, the CSRD in the EU issued a broad range of ESRS reporting standards across ESG topics, and the SEC too issued a proposal for climate reporting that will also impact financial reporting. Things are moving quickly. For example, the proposed SEC disclosure requirements for large accelerated filers begin as early as 2023, with filers in 2024. Well, let's see whether that actually is the final rule. And assurance for scope 1 and 2 greenhouse gas starting in the following year. The CSRD has also a scaled timeline with the earliest reporting entities from 2024 period ends and assurance on sustainability reporting beginning in the same year. The timing of international reporting requirements is dependent on the jurisdiction of each individual territory. If and when the relevant standard-setting bodies choose to mandate ISSB global sustainability reporting standards in their country. companies need to act fast. So what are the practical, no regret actions that you can take? So you can understand what matters. In other words, assess materiality, identify ESG risk and opportunities, get a clearer picture of state of play with a maturity assessment and benchmarking, define where they need to be and develop a roadmap to close the gap. Then collect and analyze data across the value chain that is accurate and reliable, which requires having robust and aligned systems across multiple areas of the business. Ensure the right governance and oversight is in place for the data and resulting reporting. Basically, companies need a target operating model for sustainability reporting, and later in the timeline, assess whether reporting and systems and data that underpin it are assurance ready. In some cases, that will be required for external reporting, but sometimes it's simply needed to make you feel confident in the information used in decision making. Now, this isn't all smooth sailing. Complexities that you need to be thinking about are first, the scope. How are you captured and impacted by reporting standards? And then setting up reporting that incorporates broader strategic alignment, governance and oversight, designing operational reporting functions with the data, processes, systems, and controls that build trust in reporting. I'm often asked, for those companies doing this well, what is unique about their approach? Although we are talking about reporting, businesses who bring strategy, transformation, and reporting into the mix will be the ones who create value from reporting. My challenge to you is, how can you turn the reporting challenge into a driver for better business performance? Implement faster, leaner, and with tech-enabled data solutions to manage your business and make truly informed decisions, identifying risk and shedding more light on what's driving performance. And design processes and controls that ensure data is robust, giving you access to better information to refine your strategy and take informed actions. Measure progress with metrics that matter to your business and stakeholders, and telling that story through reliable, holistic reporting. So thank you. It's been a real pleasure to speak to you as part of your ESG week.
Being conscious of time, I'm not going to belabor the fact that the overall message from Naja was really the whole idea of being proactive, particularly when it looks at the reporting from a disclosure perspective. So I'll use this time wisely now to introduce our next presenters. So Paul Feetham. Paul is the National Capital Markets and Accounting Advisory Services CMAS leader with 25 years experience assisting companies with transactions, capital raising activities, and financial and non-financial reporting obligations, including IFRS, US GAAP, OSC, and SEC reporting and ESG reporting. Janice, who I've had the opportunity to work with as well, is a partner with the risk assurance practice of PwC Montreal, specializing in sustainability and climate change practice. She has more than 20 years experience with a review, development, implementation of sustainability strategies, programs, and reporting frameworks. She has specialized experience in the areas of integrated management systems, including governance, wellness, health, safety, security, quality, and environment. Paul, Janice, welcome, and you have the floor.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. Thanks for the introductions. Great to join you all today. It's such a great event and certainly a very important conversation. So looking forward to this discussion. So today, Janice and I will go in a little bit deeper on really where Nadia just covered on some of the regulatory and the reporting landscape and touch on some of the more recent developments, give you a flavor for where things are going. And then Janice will talk a little bit about how do you get started on that, the importance of some of the initial steps to really make sure that there's an alignment between company and corporate value, as well as the reporting and the overall ESG strategy. So to get started, if we think a little bit about what's driving the regulatory change, and we can move on a couple of slides here, then really what we're seeing driving change is lots of stakeholder engagement. And maybe if we go to the previous slide on this one. So stakeholder driven, multiple stakeholders, but when we think about reporting, the two we're going to focus on in our discussion today really are investors and what's coming from the investor community. And then in reaction to that, what we're seeing on the regulatory side and regulators responding to that movement as well. We have a few stats here for you to take a look at. Coming from our investor survey we did a year or so ago now, but really demonstrating the engagement we're seeing from the investor community, a desire for more transparent, consistent, comparable information to allow the investor community to really assess company value, corporate enterprise value, sustainable value, and a desire to see material actions that companies are committing to and are prepared to take. Countered a little bit if you look at the bottom right-hand box there with some reaction from the investor community. Yes, they want to see action. Yes, they want to see what companies are committing to, but not necessarily prepared to give up a lot in the way of returns. So again, a challenge for companies to really navigate where you see the value creation and the value preservation opportunities from your broader ESG reporting. And then on the left-hand side, certainly the reaction and response we're seeing in the regulators and the SEC making some pretty strong comments in the last 12, 18 months around their views on what is material to the investor community and how they're prepared to take action if they don't see that reporting being maintained and abided by. So if we move on to the next slide, to start the journey a little bit into level set, this is a slide that we see talked about, and certainly a lot of names you'll see here familiar. I'm not going to talk about all of them because this is really what we see talked about as the alphabet soup of ESG and sustainability reporting. What we've tried to do here is give you a sense of how to understand the different components of that. So talking about the frameworks that underpin ESG reporting and how that's being found, how they're foundational. There's the ESG reporting standards themselves. And again, we'll talk a little bit in a moment about the evolution of that and how that's being embedded. On the bottom left there, you'll certainly see what's been driving as a stakeholder group in the last few years around the rating agencies and the other ranking groups, which has driven a lot of the initial reporting. And then on the bottom right, the sustainability principles that are again driving the direction with a lot of the overall broader reporting. Top right, then really what we're going to talk about again today, the harmonization, and Nadia touched on it in her presentation, where we start to see convergence and the directionally where we're going. So to give companies a little bit more certainty around what is going to be required versus what's still being debated and potentially going to move. So if we move on to the next slide, we're really thinking here about where are the global trends and what are the global regulatory winds that are blowing that are going to change and drive reporting. Certainly jurisdictionally, there are going to be nuances. I mean, here in Canada, we have our own markets regulator with a draft, exposure draft, closely watching what the SEC are doing. So the reason we thought we'd focus here is, again, these will be the global trends we see coming. And Nadia touched on some of these as well. So from the ISSB, was established late last year. Certainly the initial goal and objective, similar to under the IFRS Foundation, to really bring structure, rigor to sustainability reporting in the same way that we've seen and are used to around financial reporting and accounting standards. Similar framework for compilation and development of standards and how that will evolve. Certainly seeing that structure come in place in terms of governance, and that's what the last 12 months have really been for the ISSB, establish that governance, the process, how standards will be evolved and what will come. But at the same time, not hesitating to move forward with a couple of exposure drafts. So that's what we have in play at the moment, the general standard, and then one specific to climate. And then to give a kind of the latest update there, the ISSB board of meeting in the last couple of weeks and are starting to give a steer to the comments that they're receiving from stakeholders around those initial exposure drafts, and certainly seeing some movement in areas like materiality and giving clarity there, but also underpinning some of the things I think we're going to see consistently across these standards, like Scope 3 emissions. Certainly a very clear indication that Scope 3 will be something that survives in these standards. So again, companies can start thinking more proactively now about what's coming with these standards. So more to come here. We expect to see further developments in 2023, maybe a slightly later than initial timelines, but it will move quickly. Another factor to think about here as we think about convergence is, again, the ISSB expected or has consolidated with the SASB. So again, there are a number of standards already in play which will be converged into ISSB reporting standards, which will give you industry guidance, and a lot of the detail already exists. So again, it's not a wait and see. Some of that guidance is already there, but now converging under one umbrella. Moving to the SEC, certainly probably the one that's getting the most headlines, a very extensive proposal that they put out, 500-page document. Certainly with multiple thousands of comment letter responses. Their initial agenda was to have that proposal refined for this time or coming shortly in 2022. Certainly we're not going to make that date. The SEC has recently announced that they can extend the comment period due to some technical difficulties they had dealing with the volume of the comments we've had. And again, not surprisingly, with the SEC requirements, also some legal challenge that are producing headwinds for them progressing with that. Particularly one case that everybody's watching closely with the state of West Virginia. So developments there for sure, but again, giving direction to companies today that will allow you to take first steps. When we think about, and as Nadia referred to, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions and putting those in financial statements versus other documents. But the underpinning that is there is an expectation you will land with scope 1, 2, and 3 disclosures. The SEC went further and gave clarity around timelines or expected timelines for assurance. So again, this is the move to getting some of the voluntary reporting that's existed in the past up to what we refer to as investor grade reporting, again, with that objective of consistency, comparability. So things will change, things will evolve, obviously, certainly with the SEC proposals, but there's certainly some underlying principles that companies can start to act on today. And then if I move to EFRAG, and what's going on in the European community, definitely a globe. I'd say we view these as being sort of more advanced and accepted and embedded and standards that are moving forward in Europe. Still some decisions to be made around ultimate timing, but very important for global companies to be aware of today as that evolves. Those with global operations, significant subsidiaries overseas, they're going to see those subsidiaries required to comply with these standards. And potentially as well, some of that can move up the chain to the parent company being impacted as well. So it's definitely an area to be aware of and make sure you're on top of as we see that develop. So I'll move on. And we wanted to make sure we touched on what we're seeing certainly as a foundational framework. And you'll have seen this on the framework slide earlier around the TCFD. And TCFD runs throughout the frameworks that were in the standard setting that we're seeing, certainly from the regulatory environment, as well as more broadly. And while some of the standards will continue to evolve, will continue to be refined, they are all foundational on a framework set by the TCFD that is well established, well understood, and has been around for a number of years now. And that really speaks to, and thanks to previous presenters for teeing this one up for us, that governance and embedding of the structures within the organization to really integrate ESG to the broader communication strategy. So governance, strategy, risk management, ultimately leading to the metrics and commitments and targets that the company is going to publish. But it has to be done in a way that's supported by the organization as a whole. And again, so if we think about where companies are at today, we're having a lot of conversations with our clients around being ready for future regulatory reporting, but foundational on what does the right underpinning framework for the organization look like as it stands to and aligns to the TCFD requirements. So with that, I'll pass it across to Janice, who's going to talk a little bit more about what this means at the corporation and the value level as well.
Great, thank you. So if we could just go to the next slide. There are many organizations have already been accelerating their response in the sense of, the disclosure requirements that are coming out. But what it really means for businesses in a practical perspective is to have in place the processes, the policies, the kind of strategies and the data that's going to be needed to enable better disclosure in a more informative and deliberate way. So as we look at practical application, we've kind of narrowed it down to about 5 foundational elements. And the first one is really companies will need to start thinking about strategy and that sort of oversight from a governance standpoint, making sure that ESG is clearly articulated in terms of references at the board, the executive level, and then trickle down into the management teams to really drive performance. And of course, as businesses are building out their own corporate strategic plans, really important to be thinking much more specifically about materiality and what these disclosure standards are sort of indicating, which is that we need to understand what is the business's impact from a society, from an environmental, from an economic standpoint, and at the same time understanding how these ESG factors can actually influence the business itself. What are the risks? What are those opportunities? And then how does that drive, not as a separate ESG strategy, but one that's integrated into corporate strategies? And, practically what that really means is setting clear objectives, making sure that there are identified targets, incentives, initiatives in place, but also a real understanding of, financial outlay. What does that mean from a CapEx and an OpEx standpoint? And how's the organization going to be held accountable for it? Now, within that context, and once these strategies are sort of set up, the business then absolutely needs to be thinking about processes, credible ways of demonstrating that you actually have identified your policies, you understand what your data requirements will be, particularly driven by the materiality process, and then making sure that there are, that information is comparable, that there are various lines of defense that you're thinking about within the context of that data, and of course, moving, and this is always a journey, moving towards third-party assurance as well. It's important that as these processes get built for businesses, that this is not just put to the ESG teams, but it's really integrated into all facets of the business, from enterprise risk management teams, internal audit, corporate strategy, innovation and product development, all the way into operations and performance. And the finance function plays a very important role there. From a disclosure standpoint, as the organization is starting to set the strategy and these sort of processes, the information then can be articulated. We're seeing much more discussions, particularly in Europe, of integrated reporting, where we're already seeing responses to the ISSB and other disclosure standards with regards to how do this material information get disclosed from a corporate standpoint, but also supplemented by other ESG specific disclosures, whether because they're aligning to the Task Force on Climate-related Financial Disclosure or the Global Reporting Initiative, to really meet multiple stakeholder expectations. And then finally, of course, these sort of performance reviews that have to happen to demonstrate that, there's accountability, it's moving up to the board and the executive level for a review and approval. And of course, data underpins the entire engine of making sure that the right baselines are in place, and that there's an ability to look historically, but also to project and do the type of scenario analysis for the future. Now, slide 8 is just really sort of emphasizing that as you go down this journey, while there are a lot of requirements coming up and that aspect is still evolving, for ESG to become really sustainable and resilient for your business models, you absolutely need to be putting a value creation mindset to it. What you see on this slide is that towards on the left-hand side, questions you should be asking as it relates to your business, how you're driving growth and how you're thinking about, your impact on the environment, society, but also on your business to differentiate products, access capital, and improve your market share broadly. How can you use the ESG agenda to drive efficiency in the way that you use resources and think about employee productivity and innovation? How can you also use it as an enabler to reputational capital, stakeholder management, and then, of course, mitigating potential risks that sort of come out of those materiality assessments? And on the right, we have what role from your purpose and your vision and mission statements can you be playing to demonstrate positive impacts on society and really be a positive force for good? So with that, I'd like to just sort of leave you with, on the next slide, some key questions that are really important to reflect on in your oversight and stewardship responsibilities. First and foremost, have we effectively articulate our commitments? Do we have a clear purpose, mission, vision, and a mission? And is it underpinned by policies and codes of conduct that are consistent with our expectations, both of our internal stakeholders, but also those who work for and on our behalf? The second aspect is really looking into, much more deliberately risks and opportunities. Do we have a materiality framework that works? Is it integrated into our ERM processes? And therefore the ratings and the way in which you quantify financial impacts consistently? And has that information been trickled down into the business and the corporate strategies to really drive not just executive oversight, but oversight and implementation from management teams? In this part of the work, it's really uncovering the connection to corporate objectives, the KPIs that you need to monitor, and then have you built the right sort of capabilities and capacity building within the organization? So not only do you have, subject matter experts who are ESG, but also within the verticals of the business, is there the type of training and leadership development that's going to be needed to move this agenda forward? How are you bringing sufficient resources and approving those resources to demonstrate value creation? And then finally, of course, this notion of credible and transparent disclosure that not only aligns with these ESG standards, but is fit for purpose in a way that enables stakeholders, particularly the investor communities, to make decision useful approaches to how they allocate capital and think about businesses and their resilience. So with that, I'll just turn it over to Paul for some last comments, and we're happy to field questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Janice. So maybe just to wrap things up on this segment, obviously lots coming from a regulatory agenda, but I think as Janice outlined, there are lots of things to be done today. And things to be thinking about from that governance and oversight perspective. Again, a lot of while there is movement on the regulatory environment, a lot of that is underpinned still by standards that are acknowledged exist today that you can start to build certainly your journey around. So that will be I think the takeaway recommendation from us to think about that and start building that into the overall governance of the organization. But with that, maybe back to Kevin, or if we're happy to take questions.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Paul. As I mentioned at the beginning, there was such a power-packed segment over the morning that I think most of the questions that we did have, and some that we do have, we'll have to answer on the separate cover. So I just wanted at this point to just thank both yourself and Janice. Obviously, some of the takeaways were along the lines of the feedback from the investor community as it relates to disclosure and reporting. The whole idea of the regulators, including the SEC, the discussions around materiality, the importance of governance. But as you took us, Janice, through the journey of identifying the strategy implementation, looking at comparability and as we move to third parties, And then you ended, Janice, looking at some questions we should be asking that will obviously differentiate, but also act as access points and predictors. So I thank you very much for that. I hear my producer chiming in my ear telling me to keep to the time, so I will. Just to recap, basically this morning, we started with the keynote address from Raquel that took us from the climate impact on business. Ronel then brought us up to speed with respect to rethinking governance and picking up the pace. Agnieszka and Minister was so kind to join us as well regarding ESG and governance that also had the fireside chat. Climate change and business were the headlines that Nicole and Gail took, and then obviously we wrapped up with respect to ESG reporting and disclosures. So basically, if you look at our morning, it was quite a bit of information. The hope and goal obviously is that this information would be found useful for all of our clients, prospective clients, and for that matter, our staff that are attending in the region and globally. As I mentioned, this event was the result of some very hard work and dedication of individuals a lot of persons never see in the background. We have our markets team leader, Arthur Whiteman, Dion Golding. I don't want to call any more names because I'm going to forget them, but all of the support staff that have assisted us, I mean, even the technical staff, my ESG partners around the region, they've played a vital role acting as sounding boards for the information that we presented today. To the various presenters, obviously, I can't thank you enough because this wouldn't have been possible without you. And as I wrap up, it's just now time to take a deep breath and look at what we call the next chapter. PwC has intentionally gone out to the market in a very specific way in the region in terms of doing that market sounding that we mentioned during the 2022 Corporate Governance Survey. We also listened to you, our clients and prospective clients, to get before you some of the global leaders that we had the benefit of listening to today. So as we approach COP27, most of what you heard today will be par for the course. You will hear this again, but I think you would be able to listen to it now from a different perspective, knowing that you're armed with the information that we provided. So with that said, we look forward to continued collaboration on ESG. And we, once again, as PwC, ask that you join us on this journey. Thank you very much and have a great day.